I want to be precise about the state I was in when I crossed into the Matanuska-Susitna Valley because I think it matters. Broke men see things differently. They notice the price of gas before the mountains. I had $247 in my checking account, $11 in my wallet, and a printed email from an attorney named Gerald Swick saying I had inherited a gas station in Copper Center, Alaska from a great-aunt named Lena Cross, a woman my family had never talked about. I had driven 1,700 miles from Seattle in a truck with a cracked windshield and a heater that worked when it felt like it. The mountains to the north were white and absolute and indifferent to every decision I'd ever made. I was not thinking about the inheritance. I was thinking about my daughter. Sophie had turned 14 in August. I had not been there. Her mother sent a photograph, Sophie in a yellow dress, holding cake, looking at the camera with my eyes. I had looked at it for a long time. Then I got in the truck and drove north. The attorney's email said the estate included a working gas station on the Richardson Highway, a living apartment above the garage, and $47,000 in savings. He noted, with restrained professional bewilderment, that despite the modest business, Ms. Cross had maintained the account consistently for 3 decades, and he could not explain the income source. I was the only family member willing to take it. That should have told me something. Copper Center sat in the Copper River Basin, population around 350. I drove in on a Wednesday evening in early October. Birch trees already bare, daylight going thin and mean. The temperature was 31 degrees. I stopped at the diner first, wanted to ask about Lena before I walked into whatever she had left me. The place was called Diner, painted in red block letters on the window. A counter, 4 tables, burned coffee. The woman behind the counter had hair the color of a January sky and a name tag that said Marge. She assessed me in the time it took to pour a cup. "You're the nephew," she said. "Great nephew, Daniel Cross. You knew her?" Came in every other Saturday for 40 years. Black coffee, paid cash, never said much. She paused. Did say, the last time I saw her, that somebody was finally coming. Said a cross was coming. Said it like she'd been waiting a long time. I asked about the disownment. Something shifted in her expression. She married into your family in 78, came up here in 83, and after that your people acted like she'd never existed. She never tried to contact them. Did well for herself, though. Better than she should have on a gas station at the edge of the road. She turned back to her work. That place ain't right after dark. Folk who work night shifts there don't last. You'd be the 7th owner in 40 years. I paid for my coffee and drove the 7 miles to the station. It was more than I'd expected. 2-bay garage, clapboard siding painted white, 4 pumps under a canopy, a small convenience store attached. The sign read, Crosses in weathered block letters. Light spilled from the store windows onto the gravel lot. The apartment above the garage showed 1 lit window. I had barely killed the engine when the man came down the exterior stairs along the side of the garage, moving with deliberate care, though there was nothing slow about his eyes. Tall, thin in the way of birch trees in winter, close cropped white hair and pale blue eyes that caught the pump light. He stopped at the base of the stairs with his hands at his sides. "Mr. Cross," he said. "Daniel, you must be the manager. Elias Vane. I have worked here since 1923. I managed for your aunt, as I will manage for you if you stay. Most don't stay." He produced an envelope and a bank envelope beside it. $500, a cash advance from the register per your aunt's instructions. The letter is inside. He was on the 2nd step when he paused. Always use my full name. Elias. Not Eli, not Mr. Vane. If you call me anything else, I won't answer. A pause with weight in it. And you won't want to see what answers in my place. He went up the stairs. I stood in the lot listening to the highway and the wind in the spruces. Then I went inside. Lena's letter was 8 handwritten pages. I read it at the counter with the store lights on and the smell of oil and cold concrete drifting from the garage. She covered the inheritance first, the account, the equipment, the suppliers, reliable mechanics in town. She wrote about Elias. Then she wrote the 8 rules. I read them 3 times. By the second reading, my instinct, that this was the work of a woman who had gone strange in 40 years of isolation, had cracked at its edges. The rules were too specific. 17 minutes to replace a burned bulb. Count to 100 after the bell rings. The exact phrasing for the woman in blue, repeated exactly 3 times. At the bottom of the last page she had written, I know what this looks like. I laughed too when I first read them. I stopped laughing the first night. Follow them. All of them. Every time. Without exception. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. I walked the store. Under the counter, exactly where Rule 4 indicated, there was a glass jar, empty and clean, waiting. I found the crayon drawing at 10:30, behind a stack of motor oil boxes on the shelf behind the register. Notebook paper, the gas station drawn in orange and yellow crayon, the canopy, the pumps, the lights. Beyond the edge of the drawn lights where the child had pressed the crayon hard into the page was a figure, tall, still, standing exactly where the light stopped. Underneath, in careful, wobbly letters, friend. I set it on the counter and looked at it for a moment. Then I started my first shift. 3 cars came through between 10 and midnight. A man in a Carhartt jacket bought coffee and cigarettes, asked if I was the new owner, nodded like it confirmed something, and left without saying what. The highway was quiet. I had taped the rules inside the cabinet below the register. I read them again at 11 and at 11:30. At 11:47, the phone rang. Landline, mounted on the wall behind the register. I picked up and said the station name. The sound on the other end was not a voice. It was breathing, slow, heavy, wet, the kind produced by something that should not have been breathing. Patient. The way something breathes when it has been doing it in the same place for a very long time and has no expectation of stopping. I held the phone 4 seconds. Then I hung up. My hands were steady. I went to the log book on the shelf below, a black cloth-bound book, dated entries back to the early 80s. Lena's handwriting, phone, 11:52 p.m., breathing, did not engage. And earlier, 23rd time, does not vary, and near the beginning, June 1983, first time with the phone, nearly spoke, didn't. Gut was right. I wrote my own entry, phone, 11:47 p.m., breathing only, hung up, hands steady, closed the book, watched the road. At 1:47 in the morning, the bell above the door rang once. I did not look at the door. I had positioned myself at the far end of the counter, specifically so the entrance glass was not in my direct sightline. I stared at the motor oil shelf and listened. No second ring. No footsteps on the gravel. No vehicle. The bell had a clean, deliberate tone. Not wind. Not accident. I counted to 100. At 63, the knocking started inside the walls. Rhythmic. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks, moving along the south wall from the garage junction toward the back of the store. Whatever was making the sound was traveling, taking its time. I kept counting. At 88, the knocking stopped mid-sequence, like a sentence cut off. At 100, I breathed out, waited 10 more seconds, and moved. The store was empty. The door was closed. The gravel outside was undisturbed. I wrote the entry. My handwriting was less even. At 2:30, I heard voices outside, 2 of them, close to the door, calling my name. Not shouting. The tone of someone who wants you to know they're there, who needs you to come, who is saying everything is fine. Just open the door. The woman's voice was my ex-wife's. The girl's voice was Sophie's. I sat down on the stool and put both hands flat on the counter and stared at the shelf and did not move. The rules addressed the woman in blue, asking for the phone. This was not that, but close enough in kind that the answer was clear. I did not go to the door. I did not call back. I counted my own breathing, and after a time, I cannot accurately estimate, the voices stopped. The silence afterward was complete and cold. At 3:17, the phone began ringing and did not stop. I counted 6 minutes and 40 seconds of continuous ringing. During that time, the lights flickered 3 times. Not a surge, something more deliberate. And when I pressed my palm to the window glass, I found frost on the inside of the pane. The temperature in the store had not changed. 90 seconds later, the frost was gone. I wrote the entry. My handwriting was worse. At 4 a.m, a black sedan pulled into the lot. No plates. It parked at the far end of the canopy and sat with the engine idling. I could see the exhaust in the cold air, but nothing through the windows, dark the way a room looks when all the lights inside are off and you are standing outside looking in. Then the air changed. The store was 68 degrees. In the 30 seconds after the sedan arrived, the temperature climbed fast enough that I could feel it against my face, heat building with no source and no direction. I went to the office, small back room behind the cooler, closed the door, and sat. A sound on the gravel that might have been footsteps. Then a voice, my voice, saying my name, saying please, saying I just want to talk, Daniel, just open the door. I'm not going to hurt you, please. I put my hands over my ears. That helped with the volume, but not with the intimacy of hearing yourself speak from somewhere you are not. When I lowered my hands, it was quiet. I waited 5 minutes. The store was empty. The lot was empty. The sedan was gone. The air was 68 degrees again. At 5:30, a man came through the door. Hunting jacket, canvas pants, middle-aged ordinary except for his hands, reddish dark, skin cracked and layered like something healed wrong many times over. He smelled of cold air and something scorched underneath. He asked for directions to the mining camp 7 miles east on Old Edgecombe Road. I told him it had burned in 1987, hadn't been rebuilt. He looked at me with pleasant eyes. Son, they're still burning. Been burning this whole time. He smiled the way someone smiles over a mildly interesting observation. Still hungry too. You get hungry enough, time stops mattering. He walked back out. His boots on the gravel were loud and normal, and then they stopped before I heard a car door. I did not look out the window. At 6, a woman in a county parks jacket pulled in for diesel, paid with a debit card, said it was supposed to be clear all week, and drove away without knowing what the last 8 hours had been. I stood behind the register and felt the shape of the night I had survived. Through the window, the sky above the Wrangles was going from black to deep blue to thin, cold gold above the ridgeline. Ordinary light, the kind that doesn't care what happened under it. I opened the logbook and wrote the final entry, all of it, because Lena's entries had been detailed, and I understood now that the detail was the point. This was a record, evidence that the rules had been followed. At the bottom, I wrote, did not leave, did not open the door, followed every rule. Then I underlined it. Elias came down the stairs at 6:15 and went into the garage without looking at me. I heard the bay door rise on its track. The next car came at 6:40. I sold coffee, made change, said have a good morning. My hands didn't shake. I had survived the first night. The only thing I truly understood, sitting in the pale light of that first Alaskan morning, was what Elias had said the night before. One sentence, offered with the flat certainty of someone reporting a fact he'd observed many times over. Your aunt laughed too. She stopped laughing by morning. I wasn't laughing. The crayon drawing was in the office drawer beside Lena's letter. Outside, the tree line was just trees, cold, indifferent. But I had heard Sophie's voice calling my name from 10 feet away, and I had not opened the door, and I did not know yet whether that made me someone learning to survive this place or someone who had just proven he would choose survival over his daughter, even when the distinction was impossible to verify. I had $11 in my wallet and $500 in a bank envelope. I had inherited a gas station. I needed to understand what that meant. I stopped being afraid of the phone by the 3rd week. That is not the same as saying the phone stopped being frightening. The breathing was the same every night. 11:47, give or take 3 minutes. The same wet, patient rhythm. The same quality of something that had been doing this for a very long time and was prepared to keep doing it. What changed was me. By the end of week 2, I was picking up the receiver, holding it for my counted 4 seconds, and setting it back down with the same muscle memory I used to lock the register or check the pump readings. The fear was still there. It had just moved somewhere lower and quieter inside me, where I kept it alongside the knowledge that Sophie was not going to call and that my checking account, despite the $47,000 I hadn't yet touched, still felt precarious in the way that broke men's checking accounts always do. The rules became the structure of my days. I read them every morning with my first coffee the way I used to read weather forecasts before a pour, not because I expected surprises, but because keeping them visible was the difference between ready and not ready. I checked the sign at dusk, staged replacement bulbs just inside the door where I could reach them in under 30 seconds. I placed the glass jar on the shelf below the register each morning and moved it back under the counter each night. I learned which hours were loud and which were quiet. The bell at 1:47 became something I anticipated rather than dreaded, a fixed point in the night around which the other hours could organize themselves. The voices at 2:30 came and went. I did not go to the door. The phone at 3:17 rang until it stopped. I counted and waited and logged and moved on. The burned man at 5:30 had not come back. That concerned me slightly more than if he had. The irregularity of an absence from something that had seemed so routine. I made a note of it in the logbook and left it there. Elias moved through the property in his patterns, and I moved through mine, and we rarely spoke. That was the nature of Rule 5. He would not speak unless I spoke first, and I had started conserving those exchanges the way you conserve a resource in a place where resupply is uncertain. I used them for practical matters. Does the east pump need the seal replaced? Where does Lena keep the backup invoice records? Is the glass bottle Coke stocked somewhere I haven't found yet? He answered each question precisely and without elaboration, and then returned to whatever he had been doing. Sometimes I watched him from the store window working the garage in the early dark, moving across the lot to check the pump readings, and I tried to reconcile what I saw. A man who looked perhaps 68, deliberate and unhurried, with what he had told me on my first night. Since 1923, I had been doing the arithmetic since that night. I just hadn't let myself sit with what the arithmetic produced. The apartment was on the second floor above the garage, accessible by the exterior stairs Elias used or through an interior door at the back of the garage. Lena had lived there for 40 years, and the place showed it, not in disorder, but in the accumulated layering of a person's choices becoming a place's character. Particular brands of tea still in the cabinet because she had liked them. A shelf of Alaskan field guides alongside 20 years of crossword puzzle books with her handwriting in the margins, using the same black pen, the letters getting slightly larger in the later volumes in the way handwriting shifts with age. A birthday card on the refrigerator from someone named Kay, dated 1991, that she had kept for over 30 years for reasons I couldn't determine and didn't try to. I was still finding her in the corners. A note inside a kitchen drawer reminding herself to order filters, a single earring on the bathroom windowsill with no match anywhere I could find. I found the compartment on the 17th day. I was moving the bookshelf in the bedroom to get at a draft coming through the baseboard. October had solidified into something genuinely mean, temperatures dropping into the teens overnight, the Wrangles going white above their tree line. And when the shelf came away from the wall, I saw that the section of paneling behind it was not flush. A seam, about 2 feet wide and 18 inches tall, set at baseboard height. I worked at it with a flathead screwdriver for 10 minutes before I found the pressure point at the top right corner. It swung inward on a simple pivot. Inside, darkness about 2 feet deep, and stacked in twine, 41 composition notebooks. I counted them before I opened the first. Then I pulled the 1983 notebook and read it, sitting on the floor with my back against the bed frame. Lena had arrived in October, same month I had. She had found the rules in a letter from a man named Henry Paulson who had run the station for 9 years before he disappeared. She had read them with the same skepticism I'd felt and described her first night in terms I recognized precisely: methodical, frightening, ultimately survivable. She mentioned Elias on the 3rd page. The manager knows the rules better than the letter does. He doesn't explain things he wasn't asked about. I've decided to stop asking about the things I'm not sure I want to know. The 1984 notebook was denser. She had started tracking patterns, which entities appeared in which seasons, what the frequency of the phone call predicted about the weeks ahead, how long the bell period at 1:47 tended to run before the knocking in the walls started. She had built, over 40 years, exactly what I was building, a working body of knowledge about how to survive this place. But woven through the practical documentation was something else. References to wealth she could not explain, cash appearing in the register above what the sales could account for, the savings account growing despite no additional deposits. By 1986, she had stopped trying to explain it. The station takes something and gives something back. I don't understand the accounting yet. I'm not sure I want to. By 1995, she had accepted her isolation as a permanent condition. Former relationships had lapsed. She wrote about this without self-pity, simply as fact. She had not been back to the lower 48 since 1989. She had considered leaving once, in 1993, had gotten as far as packing a bag before something she described only as the weight of it had made her unpack again. She did not elaborate on what the weight was. She did not need to. I had felt the way this place filled a silence you didn't know you had, and I could extrapolate. Then I found the Elias entries. They began in 1997, after she had been here 14 years. She had apparently asked him directly what he was, what had happened to him, what the station was, and he had, that once, answered. She transcribed the conversation over 6 pages with the careful spacing of someone writing from memory immediately afterward. He had been a prospector. He had bought the land in 1922, built the station in 1923 over what he believed was an exhausted mine shaft. 3 workers had gone into the shaft in October 1923 and not come back up. Something had changed in the station after that. The same patterns I knew from the rules, the phone, the bell, the lanterns in the trees. He had written the rules himself from his own experience that first winter and passed them to whoever came after him when he tried to leave. He had not been able to leave. He says it like a man reporting the weather, Lena wrote. Like it stopped surprising him a long time ago. He tried to leave in 1931 and got as far as Anchorage before the station called him back. Not metaphorically. A physical sensation, a cord, is how he put it, from his sternum. He walked back. He has tried 9 times since. The farthest was Fairbanks, 1967. 3 days to return that time. He seems almost proud of the 3 days. The debt had come due for Elias in 1929. She did not write what it had asked for, only that he had bargained, offered himself, his continued presence, his function as keeper and trainer, and the station had accepted. He could not die. He could not age. He could not leave. He says he did not understand what he was agreeing to, Lena wrote. He thought he was buying time. He has had almost 100 years to understand what he actually bought. The final entry in the last notebook, dated 11 days before her death, in handwriting shakier than the rest but still precise, was brief. I read it 3 times. I've been here 40 years. The station has taken my family connections, my relationships, my ability to imagine living anywhere else, my certainty that the world I came from was more real than this one. It has given money, purpose, a kind of clarity. I think I understand now that these aren't a trade. They're the same thing, described from different angles. The station doesn't let go. It just lends you out. The debt always comes due. I closed the notebook and sat with that sentence for a while. Outside, the November wind worked at the eaves, not howling, more like a note held at the edge of hearing, sustained and patient. I put all 41 notebooks back in the compartment, stacked them as I'd found them, swung the panel closed, pushed the bookshelf back against the wall. Then I went downstairs and found Elias in the garage. He was at the workbench, working on the carburetor of the backup generator. He did not look up when I came in, consistent with Rule 5. I stood at the edge of the workbench light and said his name. Elias. He set down the tool and looked at me with those pale blue eyes and waited. I found Lena's journals, I said. He nodded. Not surprised, not concerned. The nod of a man who had expected this. She wrote about your conversation in 1997, about 1923, about what you bargained for. A longer pause. He looked at the generator, then back at me. Then you know what I am, he said. I know some of it. That's usually enough. He picked up the tool but didn't use it. You have questions. You've been waiting for me specifically, I said. Not just any new owner. Me. Why? The silence had a different quality from his usual ones. He was choosing how to answer. The station needs owners, he said. People who follow the rules and maintain the cycle. Without them, the debt falls entirely to me, and the terms of my bargain become a pause. Uncomfortable. And you need fresh owners to sustain your own existence. Yes? So you've been steering inheritances, directing people here. He didn't confirm or deny it. He set the tool down fully and turned to face me with the expression of a man about to say something he has said before. I made a bargain I didn't understand, he said. By the time I realized the full extent of what I had agreed to, it was too late. The station owned me. It still owns me. No bitterness, no self-pity, the weather. What I do now, I do, because it is the only option left to me. I am not apologizing. I am explaining it because you asked and because you have a right to understand what you've come into. What happens when the debt comes due? I said. For me. He looked at me for a long time with eyes that had been watching Alaska winters since 1923. Outside, wind found a gap in the garage siding and made a sound like a held breath. Depends what you're willing to give, he said. He picked up the tool and went back to the generator. The conversation was over. I went upstairs, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and watched the window go from black to deep gray as morning came up slow over the Wrangles. 14 degrees outside. The station sign was lit. The glass jar was in its place under the counter downstairs. I had known, since approximately my third night, that I was not simply managing a gas station. I had been allowing myself to not know it the way you allow yourself to not look directly at something that sits in your peripheral vision, solid and patient. Lena's journals had made looking away impossible. The station had Elias. It had had Lena. It had had Henry Paulson and whoever came before him, going back to 1897, and the woman in the blue dress who still came to ask about the phone. It collected people. It kept them, one way or another. And now it had me, with my thin wallet and my untouched account and Sophie's photograph on my phone that I had not looked at in 4 days, because looking at it had started to feel like proof of something I wasn't ready to name. Depends what you're willing to give. I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time since I'd crossed the Matanuska-Susitna Valley with the mountains white and indifferent on either side of the highway, I understood the shape of the question. That was enough. For now, that was enough. December came and the days shrank to something almost theoretical. By the end of November, I had settled into a rhythm that I would not have recognized from outside as anything other than routine shift work. Open at 7, fuel the pumps, stock the cooler, run the register, close at 10, begin the long count to morning. The nights had their own architecture, and I had learned to move through it. The phone breathed at 11:47. The bell rang at 1:47. I counted to 100, noted the knocking in the walls, logged it, went on. The voices at 2:30 had started varying their material. Not always my ex-wife and Sophie now, sometimes my old foreman, sometimes something with the approximate shape of my father's voice, dead 3 years, with enough accuracy to make my chest tighten before my hands found the counter's edge. I logged those too. The content changed. The rule didn't. I did not go to the door. The jar went to the crossroads on the full moon in November. I walked the mile north in the dark at -4, left it on the stump without looking back, came home. In the morning, the jar was on the counter again, clean and empty. I did not log that entry. Some things in the logbook needed words I didn't have yet. The burned man came back in early December, standing at the pump island at 5:17, facing away from the store, shoulders at the precise angle I remembered from October. When I turned on the canopy lights, he was simply not there anymore. I wrote it in the log and moved on. By December, I had accepted that the absence of a thing was as important to document as its presence. Rachel arrived on a Wednesday in mid-December, the week the daylight window in Copper Center fell below 5 hours. She came off the Richardson Highway in a rental SUV, the kind that meant she had driven up from Anchorage, and she sat in the lot for 4 full minutes before she came inside. Dark-haired, mid-30s, a jacket not designed for -8. She had the eyes of someone who had been rehearsing what they were going to say for a long time and was still not certain it would come out the way they had practiced. Her brother's name was Marcus Webb. He had worked the station for 7 months 3 years ago, and then he had not come home. I told her to sit down and made coffee and said nothing until she was ready. Marcus had found the station through something she called an arrangement, then immediately corrected herself to inheritance adjacent, which told me she had done serious research and arrived at partial answers that she had been living with long enough to have opinions about. He had stayed 7 months, longer than the 2 previous owners before him. She had determined that much. His calls home had changed in the way designed not to be noticed. Less frequent first, then shorter, then strange in a quality she struggled to name. Something about the pauses on his end, the way he seemed to check something before answering simple questions, as though the answer required a different kind of attention than it used to. In his last actual conversation with her, he had said the nights were getting complicated, and the basement was louder than it had been, and he had started to feel like the station was running him. She had driven up twice after the calls stopped. Both times, she had found Elias. Both times, Elias had told her Marcus was no longer at the station. No forwarding address, no record of departure. The Glenallen Sheriff's Department had opened a file on a voluntary adult departure and done very little with it. She had a folder, photocopies of a spiral notebook, Marcus's handwriting, the original still in evidence. I read them while the coffee went cold on the counter between us. The entries covered the 2 weeks before his disappearance. Earlier pages were practical, deliberate, a capable man's log, not unlike my own in the early weeks. By the third to last entry, the handwriting had compressed, letters running close together the way they do when someone is writing fast because the thought feels urgent and they don't trust themselves to reconstruct it later. Basement louder the last 6 nights. Not just my name anymore. It has context. Memories I didn't tell anyone. Things I thought privately. 3 nights ago, it sounded like Mom. Last night, it used Rachel's voice. Rule 8 followed exactly both times. Wait, getting longer. 40 minutes last night before a vehicle came. Road was empty the full 40 minutes, and I didn't know what was going to happen if dawn came first. The second to last entry, Man in Gray, came today. Not the anniversary, not midnight. 3 in the afternoon. He stood at pump 2 for 11 minutes without moving. I followed Rule 7 anyway. Stayed inside, didn't mention the date, watched through glass. He didn't come in. Before he left, he turned and looked directly at me through the store window and said, without raising his voice, in a register I heard perfectly through the glass, "Debt coming due." I did not watch him leave. The final entry was back to regular handwriting. The urgency gone, replaced by the particular calm that comes from a decision already made. Talked to Elias. He told me what I'd already worked out from Lena's journals. The debt he bargained away 100 years ago. He tried to transfer it, gave someone a name. My name, for a while. Then he found a better name. A cross. A specific cross. I was never the intended recipient. The debt passed through me on its way to where it was always going. I'm leaving tonight while I still can. I don't know if it will let me. No more entries after that. I set the copies down. Rachel watched me with the focused, expressionless attention of someone who has spent 3 years waiting for a reaction that would confirm what they had mostly already accepted. "He's not here," I said. "He wasn't here when I arrived in October." Elias told me the same thing. "He's telling you the truth, whatever that means." I paused. "The cross Marcus mentioned, that's me." He pointed the debt at you. He needed a blood connection to Lena's 40 years of accumulated credit. The station's debts don't transfer cleanly to strangers. They need inheritance. Actual inheritance. I thought about the 41 notebooks, the pressure point at the top right corner of the compartment panel, the birthday card from Kay on the refrigerator. Elias spent years finding me. Rachel stayed 2 hours. She asked questions I answered when I could and didn't when I couldn't. When she left, I watched her SUV pull back onto the Richardson Highway and disappear south, and I stood in the store for a while in the particular silence that follows a conversation that has rearranged your understanding of why you are somewhere. I wrote Marcus Webb's name in the logbook and the date of the visit below it. January arrived the way it arrives in the Copper River Basin. Not gradually, but categorically, the cold going from difficult to something beyond vocabulary. The Wrangles locked white and absolute against a sky that barely managed light before it started losing it again. I had been at the station 3 months. I had not been to Copper Center in 2 weeks. I had not spoken to anyone outside the occasional trucker at the pumps since Rachel had driven away. The station had a quality in January it had not had in October or November, a kind of settled wait, as though it had been waiting for winter specifically for this particular darkness and silence, and had finally gotten what it needed. On January 15th, I checked the final notebook's first page, where Lena had written her death date as though she had known it would be needed for reference. I stocked sardines and glass bottle Coke before my shift. He arrived at midnight exactly. A low, even engine note pulling off the road with no hesitation. The coat was gray, long, heavy wool, not manufactured since before I was born. He was of indeterminate age, not young, not elderly, something that had passed through those categories into a permanent middle distance. He walked to the door, and the cold that came in with him was not the outdoor cold. It came from a different direction. He went to the cooler, took the sardines and the Coke, set them on the counter. I rang them. He produced the $100 bill without searching, hand to pocket, bill on counter, 1957 series. I made change without comment. "Good evening," I said. He looked at me with eyes that carried the quality Elias's eyes carried, something that comes from existing alongside a place like this for longer than any human arrangement should allow. "Your aunt owed a great deal," he said. "She paid in full." "She was thorough," I said. I kept my hands on the counter. I did not ask his name. I did not mention the date. He held my gaze past the transaction's natural end. "You have her eyes," he said, "and her debt." He walked to the door. I looked at the register, heard the door open and close, counted to 20 before I moved. When I went to the window, the lot was empty. No car, no taillights, nothing on the gravel. The $100 bill was in the drawer. The basement calling started that same night. 2:41 in the morning, outside the Rule 3 window, outside every pattern I had spent 3 months logging. Not the bell, not the phone, not voices at the door. It came from below the floor, through the concrete slab, through the bones of the building itself. My name. Once, clearly, in Sophie's voice. Rule 8. Outside immediately. -17 degrees. A truck came through at 3:12, 29 minutes after I had gone out. I flagged it down, asked the driver for the time, thanked him, went back inside. The calling had stopped. It started again the next night, and the night after that. By the 6th night, the wait had stretched to 38 minutes. By the 9th, 41 minutes in minus 20 degrees before a car came. The cold at that temperature simplifies your thinking, strips the excess away, leaves only what you actually are underneath. Standing on the road shoulder watching for headlights, I thought about Lena's final entry. The station doesn't let go. It just lends you out. I understood now what it lent you out from was not a place, but a version of yourself. The version that existed in connection with other people, in the world where your name was known for ordinary reasons. I had not looked at Sophie's photograph in 6 weeks. On the 12th night, Elias knocked on the apartment door. He had never knocked before. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table without removing his coat. "It's time," he said. "The debt is coming due." "Tell me about Marcus," I said. "Capable. Followed the rules. Lasted 7 months." A pause. "He was never the intended recipient. I needed a placeholder, someone to hold the station's obligations stable while I located what was actually required. A cross, specifically. Someone whose inheritance carried Lena's 40 years of accumulated credit. Station debts need blood inheritance to transfer correctly, not just occupancy." He met my eyes. "Marcus bought me the time to find you. I am sorry for that. I am telling you because you have a right to know the whole of it." "Did he make it out?" Elias was quiet longer than his usual pauses. "He made it to the highway," he said. "What happens after that is not something I have visibility into." I thought about Marcus Webb on the shoulder of the Richardson in the dark. The same stretch of road I stood on every night. 9 attempts over a century. "Explain both debts," I said. What I bargained in 1929 was supposed to close my original obligation. I did not understand that an uncollected debt compounds rather than expires. 100 years of interest on a transaction I believed settled. He folded his hands. "When you arrived, carrying Lena's credit alongside your own new debt, the station registered 2 separate obligations from 2 different inheritance chains. It cannot collect both simultaneously through standard mechanism. There is a gap in the accounting, brief, closing. But while it exists, the terms are negotiable in a way they have not been since before I made my bargain. 2 debts," I said. "Yours and mine. The station is confused." "Yes. That's an opportunity." Something in his expression shifted, careful, old, not quite hope. "Yes," he said. He rose and went to the door. He paused. "The calling from the basement," he said. "It is not the mechanism of debt collection. It is something else entirely. Something that has been alone a very long time." He chose the next words carefully. "It is not asking for your compliance, Mr. Cross. It is asking for your attention." He went down the stairs. I heard his door close above the garage. I sat at the kitchen table while the wind worked at the window off the Wrangles, steady and patient, and I thought about Sophie's voice coming through the floor. Calling my name. Not in anger, not in demand. Calling the way you call to someone you have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become the whole of what you are. The debt was coming due. And for the first time since October, I was not certain that what came due was only something to survive. I stopped following Rule 8 on the 18th night, not because I forgot it, not because I was too cold or too worn down by 40-plus minutes on the road shoulder waiting for headlights in the dark. I stopped because I had started to understand what Elias had told me in the apartment, and understanding had changed the quality of the choice. The rule said, "Do not respond. Go outside. Wait. Return inside." I had done exactly that, 17 nights in a row, and the calling had stopped every time I followed the procedure and started again every time I came back inside. And somewhere around the 15th night I had arrived at a question I could not unask. What was I actually protecting myself from? The rule was designed to keep me intact until I was ready to understand. Elias had told me that, in his way, without using those words. The rules were means, not ends. Survival was the threshold. Somewhere past the threshold was the actual point. On the 18th night, I sat in the chair behind the register with the basement door closed at the far end of the store, and when my name came up through the floor, I said quietly, without moving from the chair, "I hear you." The calling stopped. Then, after a silence with a different quality from the usual silence, fuller, the way a room feels when something in it has finally exhaled, a voice came from below. Not Sophie's voice this time. Something older than that. Something that had been practicing language for a very long time and had not quite recovered the ease of it, the way a person's handwriting changes after a long illness. "You're still there," it said. "I'm still here," I said. Another silence. I kept my hands flat on the counter. I did not move toward the door. I did not stand near it. "They always leave," it said. "Every one of them. They follow the rule, and when they come back, I am still here, and they are still there, and nothing is different." "I know," I said. "I've done the same thing for 17 nights. Why did you stop?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I don't think you're trying to hurt me," I said. "I think you've been alone for a very long time, and the rule was designed to keep me safe until I understood that." The silence this time was longer and had a different texture. When the voice returned, it was closer to language, as though the conversation itself was restoring something that had been very slowly going dormant. "I was like you once," it said. "A long time ago, before the shaft, before the station. I was alone in the way people are alone when they have decided the world has no place for them and have stopped expecting it to. I came here. I found something beneath this ground, something that understood that kind of alone the way I understood it. It changed what I am." A pause. "But I am not what you were afraid of. I have never been what you were afraid of." "What are you?" I said. "Company," it said. "That is all I have ever wanted to be. Company for someone willing." I sat with that for a while. The store was quiet around me. The sign held its light outside. The jar was under the counter. The logbook was open on the shelf, Marcus Webb's name in my handwriting near the bottom of the last used page. "The 3 workers," I said, "from 1923, the ones Elias sent into the shaft. They found the same thing I found," it said. "They weren't ready. It changed them in ways they didn't choose. That is the difference. The choosing. The rules protect against that. They keep owners intact long enough to understand enough to choose for themselves. And if they never understand enough, then they follow the rules, and they survive, and the station records their survival as credit, and eventually the debt comes due and the station collects. That is the cycle. That is what has happened to most of them." A long pause. "That is not what I want. I have been waiting a very long time for someone who could choose." I thought about Marcus Webb. I was never the intended recipient. I thought about Elias, the cord from his sternum, 9 attempts over a century. I thought about Lena and her 40 years, and her field guides, and her crossword puzzles, and the birthday card from Kay on the refrigerator, and the single earring on the windowsill. All of them surviving, none of them choosing. The rules kept them alive, but the rules could not give them what the threshold was protecting. "What happens," I said, "if someone chooses willingly?" "They become something else," it said. "Not trapped, not collected, not alone. They become part of what this place is, part of what I am, permanent. in the way that belonging makes things permanent, not the permanence of being unable to leave, the permanence of not wanting to. The bell above the door rang once. It was 3:47 in the morning, outside the Rule 3 window by an hour and a half. I turned, and the man in gray was standing just inside the door. He had not come from the cooler. He was not carrying sardines or a glass bottle Coke. He had come from the door, which I had not heard open, and he stood in the middle of the store with his long wool coat and his indeterminate age and his eyes that carried the quality I had first noticed in January and recognized in Elias's eyes and now, tonight, understood fully. "You're early," I said. "The anniversary was in January," he said. "This is something else." He moved to the customer side of the counter and stood there with a patience that came from existing alongside this place since before the building had been built. "I was the first," he said, "before Elias, before the station, before the shaft was a mine, when this was just land and the thing beneath it had been alone for longer than the language I'm using to tell you this has existed as a language." He was quiet for a moment. "I came here in the way people come to remote places when they are out of other options. I was not a good man. I was not a bad man. I was a man who had run out of places where anyone knew his name." "What did you do?" I said. "I listened," he said. "The way you just listened. I didn't have a rule telling me not to answer. I sat down and I talked and it talked back and we came to an understanding and I chose to stay and I became what I am now." He looked at his own hands for a moment. "Which is present, not alone. The station came later. Elias came and built something over it and made it complicated, turned the understanding into a mechanism, a cycle, a set of debts and credits. The rules he wrote are good rules. They kept owners safe long enough to have this conversation. But rules were never the point. Elias forgot that. He made survival the destination instead of the doorway." "What is the choice?" I said. "The actual choice." "You can leave tonight," he said. "Right now. Take what you have and drive south. The debt comes due before you reach Anchorage. You become part of the calling. You spend..." He paused. "A very long time in the dark beneath the foundation. Calling to owners who follow Rule 8 and go outside and wait for a car and come back inside and find the calling has stopped. Alone, indefinitely. Or you open the door and go down willingly with full understanding of what you are choosing. You become what I am, not collected, not coerced. The debt resolves. And Elias..." He glanced toward the ceiling, toward the apartment above the garage. "Elias's debt resolves with it. Two obligations from two different chains, resolved simultaneously by a single act of understanding. It releases him." "From what?" "From the cord," he said simply. "From the terms of his 1929 bargain. From the station owning him. He will be able to leave or stay or age or not, as he chooses. For the first time in almost 100 years." A pause. "He has been waiting for this longer than you have been alive. He didn't know it. But it is what he has been waiting for." I stood behind the register and let that settle. The sign outside held its light against the dark. The wrangles were invisible behind the overcast, but I knew exactly where they were. I had been watching them for 3 months, and they were part of my sense of where I was in the world now in a way that Seattle never had been. I thought about Sophie. I let myself do it fully, which I had not done in 7 weeks. The yellow dress in the photograph. Her eyes, which were my eyes, which the man in gray had told me in January, were also Lena's eyes, a thread of inheritance running through 4 generations of people who chose difficult truths in remote places. Sophie was 17. She had a mother who was present, and a stepfather who showed up to her games and a life that was intact and functioning. She did not need me to come back from Alaska reformed. She needed, if she needed anything from me at all, for me to stop being the version of myself that had spent 3 years promising to become someone she could count on and never managing it. I had arrived here with $247 and nothing that could honestly be called a life, and I had spent 3 months surviving, and now I was standing at the threshold of something that Elias and Lena and all the others had stood in front of and stepped back from because they had understood survival as the goal. I was not sure it was the goal. "The new owner," I said, "Claire." I had her name from the station's contact file. She had been prearranged, the way these things always were. "She'll need help understanding. Someone who knows what the rules actually mean." "Yes," he said. "You'll be here. In time, you'll know how to reach her. Not by calling. You won't frighten her. You'll just—" he seemed to look for the right word. "Be present. The way I've been present here. The way the station has always been present. Patient. Waiting for her to be ready." I nodded. I looked at the store, the cooler with its glass bottle Cokes, the sardine tins on the shelf, the jar under the counter, the logbook open on the shelf below the register, the crayon drawing I had taped above the register in October, the gas station with the dark figure beyond the lights, and the word "friend" in wobbly letters. A child who had worked the station before me. A child who had understood something in the way children sometimes understand things before language makes it complicated. I had known since October what the drawing meant. I had just not been ready to know that I knew. I walked to the basement door. It was a plain wooden interior door with a lever handle. I had looked at it every night for 3 months and followed Rule 8 every time the voice rose toward me. The handle was cold under my hand in the way that was not the outdoor cold. I had recognized that quality since the first night of calling. I looked back at the man in gray. He was simply present, not urging, not holding back, witnessing. "Will it hurt?" I said. "No," he said. "It will feel like recognizing something you have always known and have been moving towards since before you understood that you were moving." I pressed the handle down and opened the door. The darkness below was not empty. It had weight and warmth and a presence I felt before I could see or hear anything. The fact of another consciousness, aware of me, waiting, the same way you feel another person in a dark room before any of your senses confirm them. The stairs went down into it. I could not see the bottom. "I hear you," I said to the dark. The same words I had said from the chair. "You're still there," the voice said from below. And this time it sounded completely different from all the nights before. Less like a thing rehearsing language, and more like a person on the other side of a door who's been listening for footsteps for a very long time and has finally heard them. "I'm coming down," I said. And I did. The car died at 6:47 in the evening, not a dramatic death, no grinding metal, no smoke from under the hood, just a soft, mechanical sigh, like the engine had made a decision, and then the road ahead was lit only by momentum and the last of the October light bleeding out behind the tree line. I coasted to the gravel shoulder, put it in park, and sat there with my hands on the wheel and the particular quiet of a highway that hasn't had traffic in 40 minutes pressing in through the windows. I tried the ignition 3 times, got nothing each time, not even a click. I looked at my phone. 1 bar, the kind that disappears when you look directly at it. I'd been on the road for 4 hours, the last 40 minutes of which had been a 2-lane state highway running through nothing but pine and the occasional rusted mailbox, suggesting someone, somewhere, had once thought this was a good place to live. I was supposed to arrive at the lodge by 7. I got out and stood in the cold and looked at the engine the way men do when they know nothing about engines, hood up, hands on hips, and waited. I was still waiting when headlights swung across me from behind. A dark blue sedan pulled to the shoulder and stopped, and the man who got out was in his mid-40s, wearing a collared shirt and slacks that were too pressed for the middle of the woods at dusk. He walked toward me with measured steps, hands in his pockets. "Mr. Calloway." Not a question. "Yeah, you must be Paul." Paul Fitzgerald shook my hand once, brief and firm. "I am." "Car trouble?" "Dead. Won't turn over." He looked at the engine, nodded once like he'd confirmed something, and turned back to his sedan. "I'll arrange a tow in the morning. Come, I'd like to be back before dark." He said it the way you'd say something unremarkable. But the way he turned, quick, no lingering, made something in the back of my skull take note. I grabbed my bag and got in. Paul drove the way some people pray, steady hands, focused eyes, with the air of someone who understood exactly how bad things could get if the ritual was broken. The lodge was 12 minutes up the road, but he didn't use that time for small talk. He used it for something else. "There's a physical copy of the operational guidelines in the welcome packet at the front desk," he said, about 2 minutes in. "I want to walk you through them verbally before we arrive." "Operational guidelines," I repeated, "for a night watchman job. Lodge caretaker position." He said it like there was a meaningful difference. The first guideline, lodge doors remain locked from sunset to sunrise. No exceptions. Front door, rear door, the utility entrance on the north side. All locked before dark. You check them yourself every night. "Understood," I said, because he'd paused in a way that expected it. "Second, do not respond to knocking, calling, or any sounds from outside during night hours. Not verbally, not by going to the door. Silence." I waited for context. He didn't offer any. "Third, if any person appears to be injured or in distress outside the lodge during night hours, do not provide assistance. Contact me on the number in the packet and wait until morning." The pine trees ran past in the headlights. The sky above the road had gone from gray-blue to deep purple. "That one needs explaining," I said. "It will." His knuckles flexed on the wheel. "Fourth, basement access is restricted. The door stays locked at all times. The key is in the welcome packet. It stays in the packet. Fifth, kitchen windows are covered before dark. Heavy curtains already in place. Sixth, do not use the radio after 10 p.m., off at 10, and it stays off." I almost asked about the radio, but something in his voice made me hold off. "Seventh, do not shine lights toward the tree line. The external floods face the porch and parking area. They don't face the woods." He paused. "Eighth, the storage closet off the main hallway contains personal items belonging to previous lodge employees. Those items are not to be disturbed, moved, or removed. The closet stays closed." The car slowed. I looked up and saw the lodge through the trees, a low, wide building set back from the road, built from timber and pale river stone, with a covered porch running the full length of the front. Lights were on inside, warm and amber behind heavy curtains. It should have looked welcoming. It didn't. Paul parked and turned the engine off, but didn't get out. He sat with both hands still on the wheel. His knuckles were white. I noticed it clearly for the first time and tried not to keep looking at them. "The last guy," he said. I waited. "Marcus, he was here for about 3 weeks. Careful at first." Paul's voice was flat, uninflected, like he was reading from a report. He said he thought he recognized a face, someone he knew, standing outside at night. He said he couldn't just leave someone out there in the cold. He stopped. He opened the door. "What happened to him?" Paul looked at the lodge. The amber light moved slightly behind the curtain, like something had passed between the lamp and the window. "He wasn't a good fit after that," Paul said, and got out. Inside, the lodge was larger than it looked from the road. A main hall ran the full depth of the building, opening into a sitting room with a stone fireplace. There was a front desk with a manila envelope on it, my name written in pen on the front. and off the main hall, a kitchen, a small office with a radio set and security monitors, a storage room, and a staircase to my quarters above. Paul moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had memorized every inch and wanted to be done with it. He showed me the 3 door locks, heavy deadbolts. He showed me the kitchen curtains and demonstrated their overlap. He pointed at the clock above the radio. 10 o'clock, he said. Off. I heard you. You'd be surprised, he said without inflection. How many people say that? He walked me to the storage closet last. Plain wooden door, simple lever handle. He stood in front of it without touching the handle. Previous occupants, he said. Several of them. Nobody came for their things, and we don't remove them. He looked at me. Don't open this door, Mr. Calloway. He left at 7:42. I watched his taillights disappear around the first bend in the trees. Then I was alone in the lodge with the amber light and the heavy curtains and the wind working at the eaves. I stood on the porch for 30 seconds, looking out at the parking area and the dark tree line beyond it. Then I went inside and locked the door. I read the guidelines in full at 8:15, sitting at the front desk with a cup of instant coffee that tasted like warm, dark water. The booklet was 8 pages, spiral-bound, with a lodge operational guidelines header and a space for an employee name. Someone had printed Calloway, R, in block letters and written the date. I read it twice. Each rule was the same as Paul had said it, with brief explanatory paragraphs that explained procedure without explaining reason. Rule 3 told me to call Paul if I saw someone in distress outside. It did not tell me why I shouldn't help them myself. Rule 4 told me the basement key was in the envelope. I checked. It was there, small, plain, labeled with a piece of tape. I put it back. Rules 5 through 8 were shorter. Cover the kitchen windows. Radio off at 10. No lights toward the trees. Don't touch the closet. The journalist in me, the part that had run investigative pieces for 2.5 years before everything went sideways, started connecting things. 8 rules. Previous employees. Paul's face when he mentioned Marcus. A storage closet full of belongings nobody had collected. I tilted the booklet toward the lamp. Below where Calloway, R, had been printed, there was a faint impression in the paper, like the previous sheet had been written on while sitting on top of this one. I tilted it until I could read the impression. Marcus, D. I set the booklet down. I checked the kitchen curtains at 9. Both windows, floor-length curtains pulled shut and overlapped exactly how Paul had shown me. I checked the 3 door locks. All solid. I turned the radio off at 10 exactly. It had been playing a country station, something with a lot of open space in the melody. The silence it left felt different from regular silence. I went up to my room at 11. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and thought about my car on the shoulder of the highway, and about Marcus D., and about Paul's knuckles, and about 8 rules that I had mostly decided were excessive liability documentation for a remote property. I fell asleep thinking that. I woke up at 1:53 a.m. not thinking it at all. The pounding started suddenly, flat-handed impacts against the front door, the kind made by someone hitting it with urgency rather than knocking. I was up and moving before I was fully awake, and I was at the top of the staircase by the time I understood what I was hearing. Then the voice. Hello? Is someone there? Please, I'm hurt, please. A woman. High and cracked, the quality of a voice that had been screaming and was now past the loudest part and into raw pleading. My hand found the stair rail. I went down in the dark and stopped in the main hall. Rule 2. I stood there and did not move. Please, the voice fractured. He's behind me, I can hear him. Please, you have to open the door. I moved to the front door. There was a peephole at eye level. I looked through it. She was on the porch under the amber porch light. A woman in her 40s, dressed in scrubs, white, or what had been white. There was blood on her sleeve and a tear at the shoulder. Her hair was half loose, strands sticking to her face. She had her hands pressed together near her chest, and her eyes were moving left and right with the frantic, unfocused scan of genuine panic. Medical scrubs, that posture, the way she held herself even in distress with a kind of trained uprightness. A nurse, maybe. Someone from the nearby town Paul had mentioned. My hand moved to the deadbolt before I noticed it moving. Rule 2. I pulled my hand back and kept looking. She slammed both palms against the door. "Please, let me in!" I stayed still. My heart was very loud in the quiet hallway. I kept my eye at the peephole. I didn't make a sound. She pressed her forehead to the door, both hands flat on it, and went still. The desperate energy drained out of her all at once, like a switch had been thrown. Then she stepped back. 1 step, 2. She moved to the center of the porch and faced the door again, and in the amber porch light I watched her face change, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a shape resolves when you look at it from the right angle. The panic was gone. What replaced it was something harder to name. Patient, attentive. She was looking directly at the peephole, not at the door, at the peephole, at the exact small circle of glass where my eye was, behind a solid wooden door, in a dark hallway I hadn't turned a light on in. She smiled. It started as a normal smile. Then it continued past the point where a normal smile stops. The corners of her mouth moved out and up and kept moving, creasing her cheeks past where skin and muscle should have resisted the motion, until the smile occupied too much of the lower half of her face. Her eyes stayed level the whole time, watching the peephole, watching me. I stepped back and hit the hallway wall. I hadn't meant to move. Her voice came through the door, quieter now. The cracked urgency was gone. In its place, something flat and resonant, like a voice recorded and played back with some of the frequency stripped out, hollow, slightly too even. "That's right," she said. I did not breathe. "Follow the rules." A pause, the same hollow quality. "For now." Through the peephole, she stood there a moment longer with the smile still in place. Then she turned. She walked down the porch steps and across the parking area, and I watched her until the tree line took her. Her gait was almost right. Almost. The weight shifted a beat late on each step, the knees hinging with a small delay, like she was operating from a distance and the signal had a lag. Then the trees were just trees, and the parking area was empty. I stayed with my back against the hallway wall for a long time. My heart was doing something unsteady and insistent. The lodge was completely quiet around me. I kept coming back to the same thing. Not the smile, not the voice. The fact that she'd known where to look, behind a solid door, in a dark hallway, at a small circle of glass a centimeter across. She'd known exactly where my eye was. She'd been watching me watch her, and she had said, "For now." I did not go back to bed. I sat in the office with the security monitors until the cameras showed gray sky instead of black, and when there was enough light to mean morning, I picked up the booklet from the desk and read the 8 rules a third time. They didn't seem paranoid anymore. Morning came in through the office windows in thin gray lines, the kind that doesn't so much arrive as accumulate. I'd been in the office chair for 3 hours watching the monitors cycle through their 4 angles: parking area, front porch, back porch, tree line east, and finding nothing on any of them. Just gravel and boards and pine and the dark giving way, gradually to something slightly less dark. At some point, the tree-line camera went from black to the color of old pewter, and I decided that was enough. I got up, went to the kitchen, made instant coffee, and stood at the counter thinking about what I had seen through the peephole at 1:53 in the morning. The smile that had gone past where smiles stop. The voice flat and hollow. The way she'd looked directly at the peephole without any hesitation, like she'd known exactly where my eye was. That's right. Follow the rules. For now. I turned the thought over the way I used to turn a lead over in my early days at the paper, before I learned that the thing at the bottom of a story is rarely the thing you wanted to find. There had to be a rational explanation, a prank, a disturbed local, someone who'd heard about the lodge and decided to test the new arrival. The smile, though, the smile kept getting in the way. I called Paul at 7:45. There was a woman outside last night, I said. Around 2 a.m. scrubs, dark hair, torn shoulder, blood on the sleeve. She was asking to be let in. A pause. Did you open the door? No. Respond verbally in any way? No. Longer pause. Good. He said it the way you'd say something fundamentally necessary. Sounds like Catherine Marsh, the clinic on Route 9. What you saw was not Catherine Marsh, but I'd recommend you drive into town today. See the real Catherine. It helps to see a real face after a night like that. He paused. Your car should be at the garage by noon. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I took the lodge's gray pickup in. The drive was 20 minutes of highway and pine, and in the daylight, the road looked entirely ordinary, except for the knowledge I was carrying. The town was small. One main road, a gas station, a post office, a diner, and the clinic with its blue sign, Marsh Family Health. I parked and sat in the truck a moment before getting out, just looking at the street. The people were off. Not wrong like the thing at my door. Not that kind, but quieter. A man crossing the road clocked the lodge truck and his pace shortened slightly, the adjustment of someone who'd recognized what it meant. A woman coming out of the post office looked at me and deliberately looked away, the practiced non-look of someone who didn't want questions. I knew that look. I'd spent 2.5 years making people wear it. The clinic waiting room was empty, except for a young man staring at his phone. 5 minutes after I sat down, a woman in her 40s came out from the back in clean white scrubs and stopped when she saw me. Same face as what I'd seen through the peephole. Same dark hair and general architecture, but everything else was different. The posture, the quality of attention, the eyes. Direct, present, assessing. A person behind them. You're from the lodge, she said. Randy Calloway, started last night. Catherine Marsh. She shook my hand. You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't. She nodded like that was the correct answer. Come back for a minute. Her office was small and organized. She sat at her desk and got straight to it. It used my face, she said. Not a question. The uniform, the face, you were there, except you weren't. It does that. She'd said it before. The delivery was flat and practiced. Uses whoever the new person would most likely open a door for. With Marcus, it started with his sister. I'm the nurse. People open doors for nurses. She paused. It learns what works. You know what it is, I said. Everyone here does. Nobody talks about it much because talking doesn't change it. She set down her pen. What changes it is not going out alone after dark, not opening your door to familiar faces at night, and keeping the lodge job filled. I caught the edge in that. Paul knows what he's sending people into. Yes. Flat, no apology. Does that change anything for you? I thought about my empty bank account, about my last article, about arriving at my mother's hospital room 40 minutes too late with a press badge still around my neck. Not right now, I said. She held whatever opinion she had behind her clinical distance. Then, follow the rules. All 8, every night. I was heading back to the truck when I passed the general store. A young woman was behind the counter, 20-something, close-cropped hair, the vigilance of someone who has grown up knowing there is genuinely something dangerous in the dark. She saw me and something in her expression sharpened. I went in. There was a box cutter on the counter. She set it down with deliberate casualness. "You're the new one at the lodge," she said. "Word gets around." "Only word worth getting around here." She glanced out at the street. "Did it come last night?" "Yeah." "Catherine's face?" "Yeah." She exhaled. "I'm Lily. My family's been here a long time." Simple. Factual. The long-timers know the patterns. It always starts with someone local, someone the new person would trust. Then it escalates. She held eye contact. "Don't go out at night, and don't trust anyone who comes to that door after dark, not even if they look like me." The box cutter sat between us, not an accident. "What does escalating mean?" I asked. She scored tape on a cardboard box, short strokes. "It learns you," she said, not looking up. "At some point it stops using strangers." A pause. "It starts using people you actually lost." I drove back to the lodge and did not turn on the radio. The afternoon was quiet in a way that felt deliberately misleading. I collected my car from the garage, new starter, $200 I hadn't planned for, closed the kitchen curtains at 5, checked all 3 door locks at 8, turned the radio off at 10 exactly, went upstairs at 11 and lay on my back in the dark. It came at midnight. No pounding, no performance. Just my mother's voice outside my bedroom window, quiet and specific the way only a voice you've known your whole life can be. "Randy? Mijo? It's so cold out here." My chest did something involuntary. I knew what this was. Paul had named it on the drive. Catherine had confirmed it. Lily had practically diagrammed it. And still I lay there with the sheets bunched in my hands, because it was her voice. Her exact voice. The slightly raised pitch at the end of her sentences, the particular way she held my name. And my mother had been dead for 8 months, and I had not been in the room when she died. "Why won't you let me in?" Rule 2. I pressed my back against the headboard. I said nothing. The pause after was too long. Same lag as the nurse mimic, the beat-and-a-half gap between statements, as if something was waiting for a response before cueing the next line. "I know you were working," the voice said. "I know you couldn't get there. I'm not angry with you, mijo." It knew. That was the thing sitting cold in my chest. It knew about the hospital, about the timing, about the press badge still around my neck when I walked into that room. Either it had watched from the tree line long enough to piece something together, or, and this was the thought I wouldn't let myself finish, it had gotten these details from somewhere else, from something it had already drunk. Then my father's voice, even, quiet, the specific tone of a man who expressed disappointment through calm observation rather than volume. My father had been dead 4 years. I had given his eulogy. I knew exactly what that wound felt like, and hearing his voice from outside a window at midnight was a different kind of horrible from the fear the nurse mimic had given me, less immediate, and somehow worse for that. "Son, be reasonable. She's asking for you. Just open the window. You don't have to step outside." Then Sarah, not pleading, not gentle, angry with the precision of someone who knows which words land and where. "You're hiding again. You've always done this. That's what this whole thing is, isn't it? A new place to disappear." The too long pause. "I see you, Randy, even when you hide." She had said those exact words to me once, in my kitchen, during the last real argument before the end of us. I hadn't revisited that specific phrasing in a long time, had let it settle under other things, the way you do when direct processing costs too much. Hearing it from outside the window produced a cold, targeted horror that went further in than the nurse mimic had managed. That had been immediate and physical. This was something else. The 3 cycled for 2 hours. My mother, my father, Sarah, taking turns, overlapping occasionally in a way that broke the illusion for a moment. 3 voices from the same still point outside my window, pauses syncing up between them, exposing the single source behind all 3 performances. At 2 in the morning, the voices stopped. The silence had a particular weight to it, the weight of something finished rather than something gone. I waited 20 minutes, then went downstairs to the office because sitting in that room was no longer something I could do. The logbook was on the shelf above the security monitors, a composition book with a handwritten label, Lodge Log. I pulled it down and opened it. Paul's entries first, dated, brief, administrative. Date, weather, nothing to report. Occasionally, sounds from North Perimeter, rules observed. Further back, different handwriting. Then another. 3 years of rotations, each in its own hand. The entries growing sparser and shorter as each occupancy went on. Marcus started halfway through. His early entries were normal. By the 4th night, voices outside. Didn't respond, rules holding. A week later, getting more accurate. Heard my sister tonight. Not her, cadence is wrong, but close. Then, saw my own face in the window, just standing there, smiling. Don't know what that means yet. The final entry was the same hand but coming apart, the letters unraveling, the pen pressure uneven, the line of writing tilting off the horizontal. It was wearing my face. It was wearing my face and smiling at me, and I could tell by the way it smiled, too far back, but it sounded like me. It knows things I haven't told anyone. I have to remember I'm me. I have to remember I'm... The next page was blank. I sat with the logbook in my lap and looked at the monitors. Parking area, empty. Front porch, empty. Back porch, empty. Tree line east. I leaned toward the screen. At the boundary where lodge property ended and forest began, a figure was standing, perfectly still, that same specific quality of stillness from the nurse mimic, not resting, not waiting. Paused. I looked at it for a long moment before I understood what I was seeing. It was wearing my face. Even on the grainy gray monitor feed, the proportions were clear. My height, my build, my jacket. The same jacket I'd been wearing when Paul found me on the highway shoulder. Standing at the tree line, facing the cameras, facing me. Slowly, it raised one hand. A small, casual wave, the gesture of flagging down a friend. Its smile stretched too wide, past the edges of its face, into something that was no longer a smile. It took one step toward the lodge, just one, deliberate and unhurried. Then it stopped, tilted its head, my head, at an angle I had never tilted mine, and stood there. I set the logbook down on the desk. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I thought about Marcus's handwriting coming apart at the end of the page. I thought about Lily's box cutter on the counter. I thought about Catherine saying in her level voice, "It'll start using people you actually lost." I had not known, until that moment, that it could also use me. The self-mimic was still at the tree line when I finally stopped watching the monitor and went to bed. I don't know when it left. I fell asleep in the office chair sometime after 3 in the morning, the logbook still in my lap, and when I woke with my neck stiff and pale morning light coming through the office blinds, the tree line camera showed nothing but pine and frost-pale grass. No figure, nobody wearing my face. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter thinking about Marcus's final entry. The handwriting coming apart. The letters losing their hold on the horizontal. I have to remember I'm me. I have to remember I'm. I understood now, standing in the kitchen in the gray morning light, why it had ended exactly there. The 3rd night, the self-mimic didn't stand at the tree line. It came to just beyond the porch, close enough that if the porch light had reached further, I might have seen it from a window. I heard it around 11, shortly after I'd turned off the bedroom light, a voice from below the window, not shouting, not pleading, just talking. My voice, my exact voice, with the specific wrongness a recording of yourself has, the quality you can't quite name until you hear it, and then can't unhear it. "You came here to disappear," it said. "That's what this is. A job nobody else wanted. A place nobody drives to on purpose. Somewhere to be nobody for a while and let everything else get far enough away that it stops feeling immediate. I lay on my back in the dark and did not move. I get it. I'm you. I know how tired you are. Rule 2. I pressed both hands flat against the mattress and stared up at the ceiling and thought about the logbook, about Marcus, about how the handwriting had been clear and organized at the beginning and had come apart at the end. I counted the days between his first entry and his last. 17 days. You don't have to say anything, the voice said. I just wanted you to know I understand. That's all. Then it went quiet. Not the abrupt switching off of the nurse mimic's performance. This was slower, like a tide receding rather than a switch being thrown. I lay still for another hour before my eyes closed. It came back the 4th night, and the 5th, and the 6th. Each night it was a little more accurate. The rhythm of my speech, the way I pause before certain kinds of sentences, the specific habits of my voice that I hadn't known I had until I heard them coming from outside a wall at midnight. By the 6th night, listening to it was like hearing a recording of a phone call you hadn't known was being made. You left the paper because the story you published was right, it said on the 6th night, from just beyond the window. That's why it ruined you. They couldn't attack the story, so they attacked you, and you let them. Because somewhere in the back of your head you'd already decided you deserved to be attacked. I had pulled the pillow over my face. The words came through anyway. Your mother dying while you were at a press briefing wasn't punishment for anything. You know that. But you've been treating it like it was, because guilt is easier to live with than plain grief. Guilt at least gives you something to do, something to atone for. Grief is just empty. My hands were shaking, not from fear, something less immediate than fear, something that went further in. I lay there with the pillow pressed over my face and felt the specific and horrible intimacy of being seen clearly by something that wanted to use the seeing. Maybe you're already me, it said, quieter now, almost conversational. Maybe the real Randy left a long time ago, a little at a time, and what's lying in that bed right now is just the habit of him, the shape he left in the air when he walked out. I got up, went to the bathroom, ran cold water over both hands, and stood at the mirror. My face looked back. My face, not a copy. I looked at it for a long time, longer than was normal, confirming it the way you confirm your wallet is in your pocket after someone mentions pickpockets. My face, still mine. I went back to bed and did not sleep until almost 4. By the 7th day, I had been writing things down on a notepad for 2 days, though I only understood why I'd started doing it on the 7th day. My name at the top, my age, the city I was from, where I'd gone to school, my mother's name, Elena, the color of my first car, a dark green Honda with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking garage in my 2nd year at UMD that I'd never gotten fixed, my best story, the one that had cost me my job, the names of the 3 people it had helped, small things, specific things, mine. I brought the notepad with me wherever I went in the lodge. I didn't examine that habit too closely. The scratching started on the 7th night, a little after 1 in the morning. I was downstairs in the office. Sleep had been ragged enough that going upstairs felt more like a gesture than a plan, and I heard it through the floor, under me. A low rhythmic sound, like something dragging fingernails slowly across stone. Patient and persistent, the cadence of something that was tired but had decided to keep going anyway. I sat very still at the desk. The basement, the door in the main hall that I walked past 12 times a day, the key in the welcome packet in the desk drawer that I had confirmed the first night and left alone since. The scratching continued for several minutes, unhurried. Then it stopped. Then the voice came. My voice. But not the polished outside version that had been calibrating itself all week. This was rougher, quieter. It had the texture of someone who had been awake too long and was running low on what it takes to keep your voice level. Randy. I gripped the edge of the desk. Randy, it's me. I know how that sounds. I know. But it put me down here. And I can't. A pause. The sound of breath caught and released. The basement is safe. The stone does something. It can't reach me here. Please. The key is in the desk drawer. Just the key. Just open the door and I'll come up and you'll see. My hand moved to the desk drawer before I registered it moving. Rule 4. Basement level access is restricted. The door remains locked at all times. I looked at my hand on the drawer. I looked at the floor. The scratching had gone quiet the moment I'd shifted in the chair, as if something had been tracking the sound of my weight changing. Randy? The voice had dropped lower, winded, the way a voice gets when everything else has been spent. Please, ask me something. Anything only the real me would know. I'll answer it. I'll prove it. I sat there with my hand on the drawer and thought about Marcus, about 17 days, about the final entry with the letters tilting off their line, about the blank page after. Marcus had opened a door. I took my hand off the drawer. The scratching started up again. Slower this time, like something settling in for the long version. I sat with it for another 2 hours. I read the notepad. Elena, dark green Honda. 3 people helped by the best story I ever ran. I read it twice and then added things I'd left out. The specific street in Baltimore I'd grown up on. My father's middle name. The name of the first editor who'd believed I could actually do the job. At 3:30, the voice came back and something about it had changed. I know you're not going to open it, it said. No pleading, no urgency. Just the observation, stated plainly. You're too careful. You read those rules 3 times before you went to sleep on the first night. A pause. I just want you to know, whatever happens, I was real. I was actually there, inside, and you're going to forget that, and that's okay. But I wanted someone to know. It sat there like a plain fact, not a lever trying to move something, just a statement. And the worst part was that it did something to me anyway. Not by making me want to open the door, but by making me aware of how much I wanted there to be someone down there who was real, and how that wanting was the exact shape of the trap. I sat with it until 4 a.m. Then I took the key out of the welcome packet. I held it in my hand and looked at it for a long time. And I walked to the basement door. I told myself I was checking. The journalist reflex. The flaw that had cost me my career and also once produced the story that mattered most. The compulsion to not assume, to look, to know, rather than believe. I told myself that restricted didn't mean forbidden, that I wasn't going in to help a person. I was going in to confirm there was no person. I put the key in the lock and turned it. The stairs went down into cold stone smell and the gray of a single bare bulb that came on when I found the switch. Low ceiling, rough stone walls. The original root cellar, older than the lodge built on top of it, older than most things in this part of the county. Empty. No person. No mimic. No scratching. Just the walls. I walked to the nearest wall and looked at what was on it. Names. Carved into the stone with something sharp. Some of them fresh, pale at the cuts, some worn nearly smooth. They covered all 3 visible walls from about knee height to above my head, names and years, some with a dash and a second year after, some with only the first. Dozens, going back to dates I hadn't expected. I found Marcus D near the middle of the far wall. The letters uneven, made quickly or in bad light or by hands that weren't steady. On a wooden crate in the center of the room sat a thick binder, the cover water-stained and soft at the corners. Faded marker on the front. Containment protocols. What works? I sat down on the cold floor and opened it. Different handwriting on different paper, assembled over what looked like decades. The early pages explained the site. A trapper. The early 1900s. A severe winter. Survival by means the writers described around the edges rather than directly. The kind of careful language that means the actual thing is too specific and too bad to write plainly. He had survived. He had come back wrong. Hollow. Needing something no living person needs in the way he needed it. The lodge had been built on the cabin's foundation later. The builders hadn't known. The people who came after did. Then the mechanics of the rules. What each one actually cost the entity when held. Rule 2. The silence. Not just the sound of a voice, but something beyond it. Some quality of personhood that comes through in language. The rules are not procedure, the binder said. They are a wall assembled from denial. Every rule kept is a course of brick in it. Every rule broken is a course removed. And then the page I read twice before the full meaning arrived. The basement cold spot disrupts the entity's sensory reach. It cannot read the occupant here. This is also why the voice from below is always a deception. The entity cannot enter the stone room, but it can project through the floor from outside. The voice calling from under the floor is the entity using your own voice as a key. There is no other version of you down there. There is only it. Breach of the basement threshold, even by the occupant alone, reduces the cold spot effect. The protection is diminished, not completely, not at once, but measurably and permanently. You will have given it something it could not take. The scratching had stopped the moment I opened the door, because it didn't need to scratch anymore. I sat on the stone floor for a while because there was no urgency in moving quickly now. What had been done was done. I read several more pages. More names, more notes from people who had sat in this same room and understood what the understanding had cost them. And then I closed the binder, set it back on the crate, and went upstairs. Every monitor showed the same image. All 4 feeds. Parking area, front porch, back porch, tree line east. The same figure on the front porch in the dark. Tall. The limbs too long at the joints. The shoulders at a slightly wrong angle. Skin the color of ash pulled tight. It was standing completely still, facing the window, and where its face should have been there was a smooth, concave depression, like someone had pressed a thumb into wet clay a long time ago, and the clay had hardened that way. No skin over it, no performance, no voice calling from outside, no smile stretching too wide. Just the thing itself, standing on the front porch and pressing that void where a face should be against the window glass. It wasn't knocking. It wasn't asking. It had always been waiting. Now it was waiting in a slightly better position. I looked at all 4 feeds cycling through the same motionless figure, and I picked up the notepad from the desk and held it in both hands. Randy Calloway. Elena. Dark green Honda. Dent in the rear bumper. 3 people helped. A street in Baltimore. My father's middle name was George, still mine. All of it still mine. I kept the notepad in my hands and watched the monitors and waited for morning. The thing on the porch didn't move. I sat in the office chair with the notepad in my hands and watched it on all 4 monitors. It just stood there, pressing that blank, concave depression against the window glass, and the longer it stood, the more I understood that standing was the point. It wasn't waiting for an opening. The standing was the attack. I felt the pull about 20 minutes in. Slow, at the edges of things, like a loose thread in fabric being drawn out quietly. Not painful, not dramatic. Just a gradual sense of things becoming less fixed than they had been. I looked at the notepad. Elena, my mother's name. The word was right, but the texture behind it, the specific weight her name carried in memory, had thinned from when I'd written it an hour ago. I went to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't drink, stood at the covered window with the mug in both hands. It's pulling at me right now, I thought. Through the walls, slow and patient. The way you'd draw water out of wood just by holding it near a flame long enough. I went back to the desk and added more to the notepad. The joke I told at 10 that made my mother laugh, the real laugh, the kind that came before she decided something was funny. I wrote the most specific version I could find. The way her shoulders came up, the way her whole face changed. Read it back. The weight returned a little. The figure on the porch had not moved. By 2 a.m, I had 3 pages filled. The smell of my father's car, old leather, and a pine-shaped air freshener on the dash. The brand of instant coffee my mother kept above the stove. The first sentence of the article that ended my career at the Courier. I could still recite it word for word. My street growing up, Garland Avenue. The color of our front door, red, which my mother had painted herself one Saturday in May, and which the landlord had made her repaint white when they moved 6 months later. She'd muttered about that door for a week. Specific things, mine alone. The pull kept coming. Occasionally, I would write something and read it back, and the feeling behind the word would have thinned again. I would close my eyes and try to reach the original, and sometimes it was there, and sometimes only the word remained, standing like an empty room where furniture used to be. The edges of the room were doing things in my peripheral vision, shadows that moved slightly wrong, seeming to breathe when I wasn't looking directly at them. I understood what was happening. The binder had explained the mechanics. The notepad was the wall. Every time I read it, every time I reached back and found the real thing behind the word, I was relaying a course of brick. And every time I failed to reach it, a course came out. Sometime around 3, I understood that falling asleep would be the end. Not because of what I'd do while sleeping. I wouldn't open a door in my sleep. But the pulling didn't stop for sleep. It would continue without the reading, without the maintenance, and by morning, whatever was in the bed wouldn't be the same configuration as what had lain down. I would wake up with my face and my name and not know what was missing, and that was the worst version I could imagine. I walked slow circles around the office, read the notepad front to back, walked again. At 4 a.m, the radio crackled. Rule 6. No radio after 10 p.m. It was 6 hours past that. I knew what the radio could do. The booklet had said it on night 1, and the binder had confirmed it. The hollow man can mimic radio frequencies. But the voice that came through belonged to Paul. Randy. Formal, slightly clipped. The particular flatness of a man who had learned to keep everything at careful administrative distance. I did not touch the dial. I sat and looked at the radio. "I know you're not going to pick up," the voice said. "That's fine, just listen." A pause. "You went to the basement." Not a question. "I did too," Paul said. 12 years ago, first week, everyone does. The curiosity doesn't go away just because you've read about what it costs. A pause. "I'm sorry I didn't make that part clearer to you." The figure on the porch monitors had not moved. "The rules tell you what not to do," he said. "They don't tell you that the need to understand is itself part of what it feeds on. Your curiosity is fuel for it. Your guilt. Your loneliness. Everything that makes you the particular person you are, that's material to it, not metaphor. That is what is happening to you right now, through those walls, in real time." His voice had worn thinner while he talked, the administrative distance harder to maintain than at the start. "I'm not a handler," he said. "There is no company. There is just me and the people before me, and the arrangement this town has been running for a very long time. The lodge exists to keep it fed enough that it doesn't go into town. Each occupant gives it something, fear mostly. The particular flavor of a person being slowly consumed without fully knowing what is consuming them. Most people break a rule inside the first 3 weeks. Then the feeding accelerates and it is over. You are on day 8. You have gone further than most. A long pause. It is feeding on you right now. Your fear, your guilt, the specific weight of what happened with your mother. That is what it eats. You cannot fight it physically. There is nothing to fight that way. But you can control what it consumes. Give it something it cannot use. Something clean. It cannot digest warmth. It has never been able to. It has only ever eaten the bitter things. Fear, regret, loneliness. Give it something that is none of those. The radio went quiet. I picked up the handset. How do you know? Because I tried it once, 12 years ago, same night, same porch. I pushed something at it. Something I thought was clean. It pulled back. His voice was careful and exact. It recovered. I didn't hold the thing long enough or with enough substance behind it. But it pulled back. I've spent 12 years trying to understand what I did and why it wasn't enough to finish it. A pause. You're better at finding the truth in things than I was. Use that. You send people here knowing they'll be taken, I said. The silence ran long enough that I thought the connection had gone. Yes, he said. Flat. No apology in it. I do. I have made peace with what that is. I am not asking you to make the same peace. A pause. I am asking you to survive the next 2 hours. The radio clicked off. I sat with the handset in my hand and then set it down. The notepad was facts, specific and accurate, a rope I'd been grabbing to stay in place all night. But facts weren't warmth. Facts were the word, not the feeling behind it. I moved the chair to the center of the room, away from the desk and the monitors, sat on the floor, closed my eyes. The pull was still there, patient, steady, working past the words toward the feelings behind them, trying to peel the warmth out from under the memory and leave the facts standing hollow. I went looking for something it couldn't hollow. Not the hospital. Not the press badge around my neck when I'd walked into that room. Not the article, or the career ending, or the months of nothing that came after. Not Sarah. Not any of the weight I'd been carrying since well before the highway shoulder where Paul had been standing. I went further back. I was 10 years old. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. I'd come home from school with a joke I'd gotten from a kid named Marcus Briggs, who sat next to me in 4th grade. A stupid joke, the kind 10-year-olds trade like small currency. I'd told it while she was stirring something on the stove, and I'd delivered it badly, stumbled over the setup, got the punchline in the wrong order. She laughed anyway, not politely. The real kind. The kind that came out before she'd decided whether something was funny, that made her shoulders come up and her eyes close. She laughed at the bad delivery more than the joke itself. She said, "Randy, that was terrible," still laughing, and she pulled me into a side hug that smelled like the yellow dish soap she always kept by the sink. And for about 30 seconds, the kitchen had been the warmest room I'd ever been in. I held that. Not the words I'd just used to describe it. The thing itself. I held it the way you hold a hot mug in the cold, feeling the warmth come through the ceramic into your palms, and I kept holding it, and then I pushed it outward. Not toward the window. Not toward the porch. Just outward. The way you'd breathe out slow after holding your breath. The way you'd open your hands and let something go that you'd been gripping too hard. I pushed 30 seconds of warm kitchen out through the walls of the lodge. Something changed. No sound, no light. Just the pull going uneven, stuttering, the way an engine catches on something in the fuel and loses its steady rhythm. I held the memory harder. The dish soap smell. Her shoulders. Randy. That was terrible. The laugh still in her voice when she said it. The pull stuttered again. Then it recoiled. Not like a tide. Like a flinch. Something encountering a texture it didn't recognize and pulling back from the contact. On the monitor, the figure stepped back from the window. Then another step, jerky and uneven, too mechanical, joints out of sequence, the movement of something that learned to walk by watching rather than doing. Its arm came up, not a gesture, just part of the body moving away. I held the memory harder. The smallness of it. 30 seconds in a Baltimore kitchen that had no weight in the world except what I gave it, that nobody else alive remembered now, that existed because I was still here to carry it. The figure stepped back again, reached the porch steps, the gravel, the grass at the edge of the parking area. The edges of its form started to come apart. No collapse, no sound. Just the outline losing resolution, the way a shape looks at the limit of what a lens can hold. It backed into the tree line, and the trees closed over it. The monitors showed empty porch, empty grass. I sat on the floor with the notepad in my lap and a warm kitchen in my chest, and breathed in and out until my hands stopped shaking. Paul arrived at first light. Same car, same pressed shirt and careful posture. He stood in the gravel a moment looking at the lodge, then came to the door and knocked twice. I let him in. He looked at all 4 monitors, empty angles, and then at me. The number he'd been running for 12 years had just come out wrong, and something in his face was adjusting to that. It pulled back, he said. Yeah, you fed it something clean. My mother laughing at a bad joke. I was 10. He was quiet for a moment. I tried something too. 12 years ago. Something gentle, I thought. Something I missed. He shook his head. Sad is still bitter to it. Sad is still what it eats. I called it clean, but it wasn't. He looked at the empty monitors. You used joy. Something with no bitterness in it at all. I don't think anyone has tried joy before. He looked at me with the same direct, measuring look I'd seen from Catherine and from Lily. The look of someone who has been surviving for a long time, doing a rapid and careful reassessment of something they thought they understood. You did something new, he said. You might have just written Rule 24. I looked out the open front door at the morning. Gray, cold, quiet. The pines standing exactly as they always had. I can leave, I said. Take the car. Find something else. Let whatever happens here keep happening. Yes, he said. You can. Or I can stay. Something moved in his face. Not pride, not relief, not guilt, but something with the shape of all 3 that wasn't quite any of them. If you stay, he said, you'd be the first person in this lodge who came back a second day with something it can't digest. That changes what the next person inherits. It changes what the rules say is possible. I looked at the logbook on the shelf above the monitors. Marcus D. carved into the basement wall below me, leaving a record the only way he'd been able to. I took the logbook off the shelf, opened it to the next blank page, picked up the pen that had been in the cup since the first night. I wrote, Day 1. I fed it something that made it sick. The rules still stand. But now we fight back. I set the pen down and looked at Paul. Show me what 12 years of this looks like, I said, so I can do it better. Just for a second, behind the careful distance that had lived permanently on his face since the first time I saw him, something moved aside. The look of a person who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had not known they were still capable of not being alone. Then he straightened his collar in the small, precise habit I recognized from the car on the first night, and he pulled out the chair at the desk, and he sat down. Coffee first, he said, then everything I know that isn't in the booklet. Outside, through the kitchen window I still hadn't uncovered, the morning came through the pines in flat gray sheets. The tree line stood exactly where it always had. Somewhere behind it, the thing was doing whatever it did when it wasn't at the lodge. For now, just this morning, it wasn't at the lodge. That was enough. What's up, everyone? Quick favor before we start. If you like the stories, then please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. If you're on mobile, then hit the hype feature. It massively boosts these stories to new listeners. Also, I'm curious where in the world you're tuning in from, so leave your location in the comments. All right, enough talk. Let's jump into tonight's tale. The coffee in the machine at Idaho Depot number 7 had probably been brewed sometime before Elias Vance had even started working there. He'd made peace with that 6 months ago. You poured it, you drank it, you didn't think too hard about the color. He set his thermos on the edge of the console and dropped into the primary chair. The monitoring station smelled like every monitoring station from his Army years. Stale air, warm plastic, fluorescence that had been running too long. The hum was constant. It was the sound of a room that never slept. 24 monitors, each showing a feed from somewhere on the facility, empty hallways in concrete gray, an empty motor pool, warehouses full of crates he wasn't cleared to know the contents of. The outer perimeter fence lit by sodium lights that gave everything a flat orange wash. The desert beyond, black and absolute. 6 months. He'd taken the job in April after cycling out of his Army contract and spending 2 months in Boise doing nothing he was proud of. GS-6 civilian security, night shift, remote facility, generous hazard differential. He'd assumed the differential was for the boredom. It usually was. He sat down and began the shift handoff log. Date, time, weather, clear, cold, 28 degrees. Facility status, nominal. He wrote it without looking at the monitors. He'd been doing this long enough that the feeds had become wallpaper. Except he wasn't alone tonight. He hadn't noticed Corbin right away, which said something about how still the man was sitting. The secondary chair, for a supervisor or trainee, never used in the 6 months Elias had been here, was occupied. Corbin Marks sat in it the way a coat hangs on a hook. Hands folded, eyes fixed on one monitor. Not all of the monitors. Feed 7. "You're early," Corbin said without turning. "Good." "Corbin." Elias set down his pen. "What are you doing here?" Corbin had been the one to train him 6 months ago. 4 days of handoffs, equipment walkthroughs, emergency contacts. 17 years on the night shift at this depot, and it showed in the way he moved. Slow and deliberate. Like a man who'd stopped being in a hurry long ago. Somewhere in his mid-50s, with the complexion of someone who spent most of his waking hours under fluorescent light. Tonight his eyes were worse than Elias remembered. The circles under them weren't just dark, they were sunken, grayish, the skin thin. His folded hands had a fine, continuous tremor. On the floor beside his chair was a water bottle, and the liquid inside wasn't water. "How long have you been here?" Elias asked. 18 hours. Corbin turned to look at him. His expression made Elias pull back slightly, not fear, but exhaustion past the point of emotion, like a man who had been very afraid for a very long time and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "Couldn't leave until you got here. Someone has to stay on the glass." "On the what?" "Feed 7. He turned back to the monitor. "You have to keep someone on feed 7. Elias looked at it. One of the older feeds. Lower resolution, slightly washed out, prone to a faint rolling flicker at the top edge. A hallway inside the old radar building on the north end of the facility. Decommissioned decades ago. Concrete walls, a bare overhead fixture, double doors at the far end. Empty. "I've looked at that feed 100 times, Elias said. "There's nothing there." "Not right now." Corbin reached into his jacket and removed a laminated card. Old enough that the edges were thick and yellowed. He held it without opening it. "Sit down, Vance. I need to go through some rules with you." "We did rules 6 months ago." "Not these rules." Elias sat. He'd learned in the Army that when a man who had been through something you hadn't used that particular tone, you sat and listened, even if you thought he was losing it. Corbin unfolded the card. The paper inside was dense with handwriting. Small, cramped, layered, multiple hands, like something added to over years by people who had all sat in the same chair. "The first rule," Corbin said, "when monitoring feed 7, you never look away. Blinking is allowed, but only one eye at a time. You must always have at least one eye on the screen. This is called the staggered blink." He paused. "I'll show you." He demonstrated. It was a strange thing to watch. Deliberately closing one eye while keeping the other open, then switching, a slow, alternating rhythm. Elias made himself watch until it stopped looking ridiculous. It took about a minute. After that, it had a mechanical quality, almost like a breathing exercise. If both eyes close at the same time, even for half a second, it advances one position. If both stay closed for more than 1 second, it reaches the glass. He tapped the monitor. "Practice it." Elias did. He felt slightly ridiculous sitting in a government monitoring station, alternating which eye was open, but he did it anyway. A few minutes in, it felt almost natural. "Rule 2, Corbin continued. "The white event. The screen goes to full white static. When that happens, you do not blink at all. The white lasts exactly 12 seconds. Count them. If you blink during it, the thing advances 3 positions. If you close both eyes during the white..." He stopped and breathed. "It reaches the glass immediately. Your eyes will burn. You'll want to rub them. Do not." He went through all 7 rules. He read each from the card, paused, explained. "Rule 3. During the white event, ignore every other monitor. The figures you see on them are copies, traps, lies, and the real one is always only on feed 7. Rule 4. If you hear your name from the station speakers, don't respond, don't acknowledge, don't even change your breathing. Rule 5. The hourly radio check-in. The exact words to use and what to do if the dispatcher's voice sounds wrong, too slow, too flat, too eager. Rule 6. If the power flickers, do not move, do not turn around, no matter what you feel behind you. Rule 7. The 4:34 a.m. system reset. 7 seconds of total darkness, back turned to all monitors, hands pressed hard over ears, count to 7. When he was done, he held out the card. Elias took it. "Walk me through Rule 5, Corbin said. Elias read it off the card. "Radio checks every hour on the hour. Dispatcher says Depot 7, this is control, status. I say status nominal, feed 7 holding. Exact words. If the voice sounds wrong, I use the same response. If they ask me to do anything, leave the station, check another feed, I say unable, holding position. Why? Because the real dispatcher knows the rules, the imitation doesn't." Corbin nodded once. "Say the response. Status nominal, feed 7 holding." Again. "Status nominal, feed 7 holding." "Good." He looked at feed 7. "You think I'm having a breakdown?" Elias considered being polite. "I think 17 years of nights in an isolated facility does things to a person." "Fair. I thought the same about the man who trained me." His voice stayed even. "Then one night the screen went white, and I counted 12 seconds with my eyes burning, and the thing was right there against the glass. After that, I stopped thinking he needed rest." "What is it?" "I know what it does better than what it is." He nodded at the card. "Those 7 rules cover everything I've seen it try. They'll keep you alive through a shift." The clock above the monitors read 1:52 a.m. Elias looked at the walls. He'd noticed the scratches before, at eye level along the section nearest the primary chair. He'd assumed they were incidental. Now he looked carefully. Tally marks in groups of 5. Single lines with dates, names. The oldest were faded almost to nothing. The newest had pale, raw edges. "How many people have sat in this chair?" he asked. "The ones who followed the rules. About 40. Corbin stood slowly, joints stiff from the long sit. His eyes stayed on feed 7, even as he rose. "The ones who didn't is a shorter list, but not because there were fewer." At 2 a.m. exactly, Corbin stopped. He looked at feed 7 one last time, with an expression Elias couldn't quite name. Not fear, not resignation, something closer to acknowledging a debt you've known about for years and are finally settling. "It has my name now," he said. "I can't stay." "What does that mean?" "It means what it means." He pocketed the water bottle and smoothed his collar with deliberate slowness. "Your turn, Vance." Corbin. Staggered blink on feed 7. Don't respond to the voices. Don't look away during the white event. 4:34. Back to the monitors. Hands over ears. Count to 7. He paused at the door. "You're more stubborn than I was. That'll serve you." He opened the door and walked out. Elias pulled up the hallway camera on monitor 4. Corbin walked away down the corridor, head slightly down. Elias watched him all the way to the exit vestibule. Corbin stopped at the outer door. Then he turned. The vestibule camera sat in the upper corner, angled down. It showed Corbin standing at the push bar, except instead of going through, he'd turned to face the lens directly. His lips were moving. Elias turned up the audio and got nothing but system hiss. He watched Corbin's mouth anyway, and with the specific discomfort of a man who doesn't want to know but can't stop himself. He read it, his own name, over and over. Corbin pushed through the door and walked outside. The northern exterior camera showed him walking north, not toward the parking lot, not toward the road, into the desert, into the dark, his figure shrinking in the frame until the sodium lights no longer reached him, and the camera showed only flat ground and silver sagebrush and nothing. Elias sat with that for a while. Then he turned back to feed 7. The empty hallway, the concrete walls, the double doors. He began the staggered blink. The next 45 minutes were the longest in recent memory. Nothing happened on any of the 24 feeds. He ran his sweeps, quick looks at the other cameras, eyes back to feed 7. Empty facility, orange-lit perimeter, black desert. Nothing. He thought about the names on the wall. At 2:47 a.m., feed 7 flickered. A single roll of distortion, top to bottom. The kind old CRTs make with signal interference. He'd seen it happen on this feed before. He'd always assumed it was the equipment's age. The picture steadied. In the hallway, the empty hallway that had been empty for 6 months, there was a figure. Standing near the far wall, 2/3 of the way down the corridor. It hadn't been there a second ago. Not a second ago, not 10 minutes ago, not in 6 months of shift work. It was there now. The shape was roughly human. Roughly, because the edges weren't right. They moved even in stillness. A slow, rolling quality, like static on a dead channel given a body and made to stand upright. No features resolved, just a shape of constant gray-white noise facing the camera. Elias did not blink. He began the staggered blink, left eye, then right. His hands were tight on the armrests. The figure didn't move. It stood in the static and faced the camera with the stillness of something that doesn't need to move because it already has your full attention and it knows it. The clock read 2:51 a.m. The radio crackled. "Depot 7, this is Control. Status." He reached for the mic without looking away from feed 7, left eye open, right briefly closed while his hand found the button. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding." A pause. The normal kind. Someone on the other end noting it down, finishing their coffee, existing in their own warm and ordinary night somewhere that wasn't this. "Copy. Next check at 3 o'clock. Elias let out a slow breath. He kept his eyes on feed 7. The figure hadn't moved. He had followed the rules. He had said the right words. For one fragile moment, he felt something close to competence, the specific, grounded feeling of doing a thing correctly when it counted. He hadn't had that feeling reliably in a while. Then the station speakers crackled, not the radio. The wall-mounted speakers for internal facility announcements, the ones that hadn't broadcast anything in all 6 months he'd worked here. A voice came from them, thin, trembling at its edges in a way human voices don't tremble. It had the quality of something heard through a wall or across a distance not measured entirely in feet. "Eli," as Corbin's voice. Every specific quality of it, the register, the roughness in the lower range, the way he'd said Elias's name, it was begging. Elias's hand went tight on the armrest. He kept his eyes on feed 7. He did not respond. The figure in the hallway hadn't moved. It stood in the static and watched the camera and waited with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time and had learned through all that time that patience was its best tool. Outside, the exterior camera showed flat ground and sagebrush. Corbin Marks was nowhere visible. The desert was dark and still. Elias sat alone in the monitoring station and did the staggered blink, one eye and then the other, and said nothing. The voice didn't come again, but it felt closer than the speakers should have made it. The whisper from the speakers didn't come back. That was almost worse. Elias sat with his eyes on feed 7 and listened to the station settle around him. The cooling fans, the low hum of the fluorescents, the faint tick of the CRT banks. The figure in the hallway of the old radar building hadn't moved. 2/3 down the corridor, facing the camera, made of slow, rolling static that shifted even when the rest of it was still. He did the staggered blink, left, then right. The clock read 3:04 a.m., 1 hour since Corbin had walked into the desert. The exterior northern camera showed nothing. Flat ground, pale sagebrush, the sodium lights ending where the dark began. The problem with the staggered blink was that it required just enough concentration to be exhausting and not quite enough to keep his mind engaged. It was like keeping one finger tapping on a table, simple enough that his brain stopped treating it as a task, which meant his thoughts started wandering, which meant he kept having to haul them back. He'd been awake since 6 the previous morning, and he was running on bad coffee and whatever nervous energy the last hour had produced. He needed something to do with his hands. The file cabinets were against the wall to his left, within arm's reach. He'd always assumed they held supply logs and maintenance records. He'd never opened them. He did now. First drawer, supplies. Second, equipment logs back to 1994. Third drawer, bottom, heavier than the others. He pulled it open and found the logbooks. Standard government issue. Green cloth covers, black binding, the kind from a federal supply catalog. 11 of them. He stacked them on the console beside his thermos, keeping feed 7 in his periphery, the staggered blink going without fully thinking about it. The earliest was dated 1971. Same handwriting throughout. Neat, small, consistent. One person, every entry, for what looked like a decade. Date, time in, time out, camera status, notable events. Most said, no notable events, but not all. About 40 pages in, the first anomalous entry. March 1974, feed 7, figure present, staggered blink maintained, white event at 0312, duration 12 seconds, no breach, figure returned to position 1, hands steady. He turned pages, more entries, weeks of nothing, then another, voice through speakers, did not respond, and later, figure at position 3 after simultaneous blink, my fault, recovered, remainder of shift nominal. The handwriting changed in 1983, new guard, same format, a little more personal. Every few months, a note on a position advance or a close call. One entry that just said, bad night and nothing after it. Then one stopped him. June 1989, in the neat small hand from 1971. Whoever it was had come back, or never fully left. Figure reached position 9. Closest yet. He was against the glass. I could see his face. He doesn't have one. He's looking for one. Added later in different ink. Do not read this entry to anyone new. They will not sleep. Just tell them the rules. The last entry in that handwriting was from 1991. 3 words. It has... That was it. Mid-sentence. The pen had dragged at the dash, like it had been set down quickly. The rest of the page was blank. He set that logbook down, picked up the next. A new hand. A guard starting in 1992, picking up from where the last one had apparently stopped being able to continue. His first entry, I was told not to ask what happened to the previous guard. I was told the rules. I am writing them down here in case I need to check them. And then all 7 rules, written from memory, every detail correct. He pulled his chair slightly left and opened the computer terminal. Mid-90s government issue, beige tower, credentials taped to the underside of the keyboard. He logged in and went to the personnel folder. Corbin Marks, active. Night security, monitoring station. Start date 2007. No flag, no notation. Nothing to indicate he'd walked into the Idaho desert 3 hours ago. He found the subfolder labeled Historical Personnel. William Sellers, Night Security. Start date 1981. End date, blank. He opened the file. A scanned photograph. A man in his late 40s, dark circles, a stillness in his expression that Elias recognized now as something specific rather than photographic flatness. The notes were standard until the last one, dated 11 years ago. Guard Sellers did not report for shift relief. Exit camera confirmed subject departed north perimeter on foot at 0431. No personnel recovery conducted per standing protocol. No recovery per standing protocol. He thought about Corbin walking north. He thought about the 1991 log entry ending mid-sentence. The names on the wall, the tally marks. Corbin hadn't done something unique. He'd done something old. It has my name. Going outside. Don't follow. Sellers, 11 years ago. It has my name now. I can't stay. Corbin, 3 hours ago. He went back to the archive. Found a folder labeled Technical Archive. Scanned documents, pages slightly skewed. He opened the oldest one. Header, Department of Defense, eyes only. Below it, Project Lucid Lens, status update, October 1957. Most of it was redacted, long black bars, but the unredacted fragments were enough. The project had used the radar array in the north building, the old radar building whose hallway was currently occupied. The array had broadcast focused electromagnetic pulses over the horizon. The 1957 test had been a success. Then a section probably missed by the redactor because they hadn't understood what they were reading. Array successfully illuminated target area. During broadcast, Array contacted frequency outside intended operational parameters. Post-test monitoring of closed-circuit output indicates presence of unidentified signal artifact. Artifact exhibits behavior inconsistent with equipment malfunction. Recommend extended monitoring. Recommend extended monitoring. He scrolled to the attached image. Black and white photograph, slightly overexposed. 2 men in lab coats in front of the radar array. One had been scratched out, not digitally but physically, the original defaced before scanning. Just a void where a face should have been. The second man was smiling, hands in his pockets. Beneath the photograph, in blue pen, added long after filing. He looked away. Elias looked at feed 7. The figure was still there. He was doing the staggered blink without thinking about it now. Left, right, almost automatic. He understood what the names on the wall were. They weren't decoration. They were the source material for every rule on the laminated card in his pocket. At 3:44 a.m., the monitors on his left flickered. Not feed 7. The feeds beside and below it. East warehouse, motor pool, secondary hallway. 1 roll of distortion across each. Then they steadied. And in each of them, a figure. Same shape, same slow rolling static at the edges. 1 in the warehouse doorway. 1 at the far end of the motor pool. 1 in the secondary hallway, almost the same position as the feed 7 figure in its own corridor. All facing their cameras, all still. His eyes wanted to move. The reflex was strong. 3 figures had appeared 6 inches from where he was looking, and every part of him said to check them. He kept his eyes on feed 7. Rule 3. The others are mirrors, reflections, lies. The real one is only on feed 7. He held feed 7 in direct vision and kept the peripheral figures in the corners of his sight. 3 shapes of static in their frames, and he kept the staggered blink going and did not turn his head. In his periphery, they didn't move. They just waited for him to make a mistake. At 3:46 a.m., the speakers clicked, the relay engaging. "Elias," a woman's voice, soft, trembling slightly. "Elias, it's Mom. I'm scared, sweetheart. I don't know where I am." It was perfect. The way she said his name, the emphasis on the first syllable, the word sweetheart that she only used when she was genuinely frightened and not just fretting. He had not called her in 8 months. He still didn't know what to say about the discharge. His eyes were hot. He did not respond. The voice changed. "Vance!" Flat and clipped. The voice of a man who had never softened a vowel in his professional life. "You froze up again. Same as always. You know what that makes you?" A pause designed to land. "The problem." Sergeant Kowalczyk. Exact inflection. The precise cruelty of it, always aimed at whatever you were least certain about. Elias's jaw was tight enough to ache. He did not respond. The voice changed again. "Eli." Quieter. Rougher. "It's Corbin. I'm in the radar room. I can see the camera light. That means you can see me. Just look at me for 1 second. Just one." There was no microphone in the radar room. There had never been a microphone in the radar room. Feed 7 was a one-way feed. "Please," the voice said. "Just look at me." He did not look. He did not speak. He kept the staggered blink until the speakers went quiet. The clock read 3:47. At 3:48 a.m., Feed 7 went white. Not a flicker. All at once. Instant. Total. The concrete hallway was gone, replaced by pure white static bright enough to light the room. He did not blink. He forced his eyes wide. The white was physical, like it had weight against his corneas. His eyes watered within 3 seconds. He let them water. 1, 2, 3. Tears ran freely. His vision blurred at the edges. The center of Feed 7 was still white, and he kept his gaze there. 4, 5, 6. The room dropped in temperature, not gradually. Sudden, like a door opening onto something that wasn't outside air. 7, 8, 9. Something pressed against the glass. Not Feed 7 specifically, all of them. He couldn't look to confirm it, but he felt it. A change in the quality of the room. A presence the white was holding at the surface of every screen at once. 10, 11. The burn was deep. Tears dripped off his chin. He did not close his eyes. 12. The white cut off. All of it, all at once. Elias blinked. One involuntary blink, both eyes. The reflex too strong after 12 seconds. He felt it happen and looked immediately at Feed 7, left eye open before the right had finished closing. The figure was not 2/3 down the corridor. It was at the end, directly in front of the camera. Its hand was pressed flat against the lens, the static around it churning like water around a stone. Through the tears and the low resolution, he could see the vague suggestion of a face. Not features, just the impression of something pressing closer, trying to see through. And on every other monitor, all 23, the same thing. The same hand against the glass. The same face pressing from every angle, every camera, every screen in the room simultaneously. Elias sat very still. He began the staggered blink. His hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed until now. The same fine tremor he'd seen in Corbin's hands. He understood now that it wasn't exhaustion. It was the specific vibration of a person holding themselves completely still when everything in them wants to move. He kept his eyes on Feed 7. The face against the glass did not move. It pressed, and it waited. So did he. The face against the glass didn't move for 11 minutes. Elias watched the clock between blinks, one eye on Feed 7 and one eye on the minute hand. The figure was pressed against the camera lens, its static hand flat on the glass, the suggestion of a face pushing forward like it was trying to see through frosted plastic. The other 23 monitors still showed the same face from every angle, a ring of pressing, watching gray-white noise surrounding him from all sides at once. He kept the staggered blink, left, right, left, right. At 3:59 a.m., the peripheral monitors dropped back to normal one by one. Empty warehouse, empty motor pool, empty hallways. Feed 7 went last. The hand withdrew from the lens. The face receded. The figure stepped back down the corridor to the far end, back near the double doors, back to where it had first appeared. Watching, patient, still, like it had only been checking something and was satisfied. Elias let out a slow breath. His eyes were still raw from the white event, the skin below his cheekbones tight where the tears had dried. He kept the staggered blink. The clock turned to 4 a.m. He reached for the radio. The hourly check-in was as routine as anything in his life had ever been. 12 times a shift, 6 shifts a week, 6 months running. Pick up the handset, wait for the carrier tone, respond to dispatch. He'd stopped thinking about it after the first week. He thought about it now. He keyed the mic and got static, not the brief hiss before a connection cleared. This was thicker, longer, the kind that seemed to push back against the signal rather than just fill the absence of one. Then a voice came through. "Copy." A pause that was too long. "L-E-S." Another pause. "All feeds nom inal." It was a woman's voice. The right register, the right general shape, but wrong in ways that were hard to pin down precisely. Too slow, like a recording played at 3/4 speed. The spaces between syllables stretched just past where they should have ended. Too flat. The real dispatcher had a professional neutrality, the kind that came from doing the same job well for a long time. This was a different kind of flat. It was the flat of something that had learned what the words sounded like but hadn't learned why people said them. Elias looked at feed 7, figure at the far end. Still, he responded with the exact words. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding." Silence. 6 seconds. Then the voice again. Same stretched cadence. "Depot 7. Proceed to radar building. Check. Feed source." The cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Rule 5. If the dispatcher asks you to do something, you refuse. He keyed the mic. "Unable. Holding position." Longer silence. Then the voice came back, and this time it was slightly different. Closer, like the distance between speaker and microphone had halved. "That was the correct answer." The transmission cut off. The carrier tone returned, normal. Elias set the handset down. His fingers were cold. Feed 7 was holding. Figure at the far end, same position. He checked the clock. 4:03 a.m. 31 minutes to the reset. He knew Rule 7 by memory now. At 4:34, the system performed a hard reset. All feeds dark, 7 seconds. Back turned to the monitors, hands over ears, count to 7. He'd read it on the card. He'd heard Corbin say it. He'd understood it as a fact, in the same way you understand that a fire exit exists before you've ever needed to use one. Understanding a fact and knowing what it would feel like were two different things. Knowing what it would feel like to stand in a completely dark room with your back to dead screens and your hands pressed over your ears while something behind you wanted you to turn around. That was a different kind of knowing, and he was 31 minutes away from it. He rehearsed it anyway. Stand, turn, hands over ears, count to 7, don't look, don't listen, don't believe the voices. At 4:12 a.m., the lights flickered. One stutter, fluorescence dimming and staying dim. The cooling fans in the walls dropped in pitch. The monitors dimmed simultaneously, the CRT images going slightly soft. Elias did not move. He kept his eyes on feed 7 and his hands on the armrests. The temperature dropped. He felt it on his forearms first, then the back of his hands, then his neck. Not a gradual cool, more like stepping from a heated room into an unheated one, except nothing around him had changed. The cold was in the room with him now. Feed 7 showed the figure still at the far end, same position, but it felt like it was paying a different kind of attention, less like it was watching the camera and more like it was watching the room on the other side. He kept the staggered blink, left, right, cold breath on the back of his neck, very precise. The exact sensation of someone standing close behind you and exhaling. The slight directional quality, the specific location at the top of the spine where neck meets skull. He felt each part of it, and every part of him wanted to turn. He did not turn. He fixed his eyes on the center of feed 7 and kept the staggered blink and breathed at the same rate he had been breathing all hour. Something traced down his spine. A light touch, starting between his shoulder blades and moving downward, slow and deliberate, like a finger drawing a line down the center of his back. No warmth to it. It had the temperature of the cold that was already in the room. He stared at feed 7. Left eye, right eye. The touch stopped at the small of his back. Then the hands came, both at once, settling onto his shoulders from behind, not grabbing but pressing, the weight and shape of 2 hands, each finger individually felt, palms flat against the tops of his shoulders. The cold went through his shirt and into the muscle beneath. His jaw clamped shut. His vision blurred at the edges from the adrenaline, and he blinked, one eye, then the other, and kept his gaze on feed 7 and did not move. The hands gripped harder. He thought about the 1989 log entry. He doesn't have one. He's looking for one. He thought about Corbin saying, "You're more stubborn than I was. That'll serve you." He held those things like ballast, and he did not move. The grip tightened once more, and then the lights came back to full, all at once. Fluorescence restoring, fans resuming pitch, monitors brightening. The hands were gone. The cold was gone. The room was the same room it had been all night. Warm plastic smell, CRT hum, the ticking of cooling fans. Feed 7 showed the figure at the far end, patient as ever. Elias sat in the primary chair and let his heartbeat come down and did not turn around to check if anything was behind him. He knew nothing would be. That was the point of the touch. Not to be there when he checked, but to make him check. The checking was the mechanism. The checking was what it wanted. He didn't check. At 4:17 a.m., the speakers crackled. Not a voice this time. His own voice. Status nominal. Feed 7 holding. His exact words from the 4 a.m. transmission, played back at full volume. Perfect fidelity. Then again. Then faster. Then slower. The phrase losing its shape. The words breaking down into syllables. Status. Nom. Inal. And then into something that wasn't quite syllables anymore. His voice doing things his voice had never done. He kept his eyes on feed 7. He did not respond. Responding was acknowledging. Acknowledging was the same as looking away. The playback stopped. The 4 monitors in the center bank flickered, going dark for 1 second and coming back with new images. His apartment. He recognized it before he could choose not to. His couch, his television, the window with the half-closed blinds. The angle was from the foot of his bed, except there was no camera at the foot of his bed. He could read the clock on his nightstand, 3:47 p.m., yesterday afternoon, before he'd left for his shift. In the corner of the bedroom, between the closet door and the wall, something stood. Same shape, same rolling static at the edges, standing in the corner of his bedroom in footage from yesterday afternoon, facing the bed. It raised one hand and waved, slow and deliberate, the way you wave at someone across a distance. Elias filed it. His apartment had a television, older model, built-in tuner, a receiver. The entity lived in broadcast signals and closed-circuit feeds. He filed that thought in the part of his mind that would need to deal with it later, not tonight, not right now, and kept his eyes on feed 7 and did not respond to the wave. The 4 monitors went back to their normal feeds. The speakers went quiet. The clock read 4:22 a.m., 12 minutes to the reset. He focused on his breathing, even and slow, the technique from comms training for keeping steady during operations. He watched feed 7 and counted minutes. At 4:25, the figure at the far end shifted, a small lateral move, 2 or 3 feet left, then back, like it was restless, like it had been standing still for a very long time and was starting to lose patience. At 4:28, it moved forward. 1 clear step, then stopped. He checked himself. Had he double blinked without catching it? He didn't think so, but this deep in the night, after everything his eyes had been through, he couldn't be fully certain. He filed it and kept watching. 4:29, another step forward. Then at 4:30, 2 more in quick succession, each one timed precisely to the alternation of the staggered blink. It was finding the gaps. It had been watching him blink for hours, and it was learning to move inside the microfraction between one eye closing and the other opening. He tightened the blink. Faster alternation, less time between. The figure advanced again anyway, midway down the corridor now, moving faster in the last 4 minutes than in the previous 2 hours, like something that had been conserving itself all night and was finally spending. The clock read 4:32, 2 minutes. He ran through Rule 7 one last time. Stand. Turn your back to the monitors, hands over ears. Count to 7. Don't look. Don't listen. Don't believe the voices, whoever they sound like. At 4:33, it stopped conserving entirely. It moved without waiting for blink gaps. The static form stretched and distorted as the speed increased, arms too long, the head wrong, the edges bleeding outward into interference patterns that crawled from feed 7 onto the adjacent monitors. He was watching it run down the corridor, and the staggered blink was doing nothing because it wasn't waiting for the gaps anymore. It was just coming. His eyes burned from keeping them open. He kept them open. The figure filled more of the frame with every second, the corridor shrinking behind it, the double doors at the far end disappearing into the static that surrounded it. At 4:33:55, it reached out one arm toward the camera, the fingers of a hand made entirely of rolling interference extending toward the lens. The tips touched the glass of the camera housing, and the feed 7 image lurched. A burst of distortion, the image rolling and stabilizing and rolling again. He did not close his eyes. 4:33. Every screen in the room went black. All 24, simultaneously, cutting to absolute black. The fluorescent lights cut out at the same instant. The cooling fans spun down. The hum that had been the constant background of the entire night dropped into a silence so complete he could hear his own blood. Dark, completely dark. Behind him, something breathed, slow and deliberate, in the space behind the chair, close enough that if he turned, he would have been facing it within arm's reach. He did not turn. Then, from a place that felt less like behind him and more like inside his own head, in his own voice, his exact voice, the one it had been practicing from his radio transmissions all night. "You have to look now. The reset is starting. You have to check." Elias stood up from the chair. He turned away from where the voice had come from, which meant he turned to face the dead monitors, and then he stepped back so his back was to the screens. He raised both hands and pressed them hard against his ears, palms flat, fingers spread, pressing until all he could hear was the pressure of his own hands and the blood moving in his head and nothing else. He began counting. 1, 1. The room was completely dark, not dim, dark in the way that only exists when every light source is removed at once, when your eyes search for something to adjust to and find nothing. The only exception was the emergency exit sign above the door, a faint red-green glow too weak to illuminate anything except itself. It told him where the door was and nothing else. He kept his hands pressed hard against his ears. Palms flat, fingers spread, pressing until the room went from dark and quiet to dark and internal. Just the pressure, just the blood moving in his head, just the count. 2. He was standing with his back to the monitors. He could feel them behind him the way you feel a wall in the dark. Not touching it, just knowing it was there. 24 dead screens. The cooling fans had stopped with the power, and the absence of their hum was its own sound. The sound of a room that had been running for decades suddenly holding still. And somewhere in the space between the screens and the room, or between the room and something else entirely, the thing that had been pressing its hand against the camera lens 2 minutes ago. He counted. 3. The scream came from inside his head. Not from behind him, not from the speakers, which were as dead as everything else. It came from inside. His mother's voice at full volume, shrieking his name the way she had screamed it when he was 8 years old and had fallen off the garage roof and she came running from the back garden. That specific pitch, that specific terror. The kind of sound that doesn't fade in memory, because memory doesn't file it the same way it files ordinary things. It lasted 2 full seconds and then cut off completely. He kept his eyes squeezed shut. He kept his hands over his ears. 4. The hands came, Both shoulders at once, hard, not the pressing weight from the power flicker, but grabbing, the fingers digging in, and they spun him. He felt his feet pivot on the concrete floor, felt the momentum of being turned against his will, and then he was facing a different direction from the one he'd chosen, and something was directly in front of him. He couldn't see it. His eyes were shut, but he could feel it, the cold of a presence that occupied space without having a body, and most of all the breathing on his face. Close, less than a foot, something exhaling from a place that had no lungs. He kept his eyes shut. He kept his hands pressed hard against his ears, even as the arms held him in place. He had not stopped counting. 5. The hands were still on his shoulders. The breathing was still on his face. And then from the same place the scream had come from, not the room, not the speakers, but somewhere inside the space behind his eyes. A voice. Corbin's voice. Quiet, tired, kind in the specific way that only Corbin had ever been kind, with the warmth of someone who has been through something terrible and is trying to make it easier for the person after them. It's over, Eli. You can look now. The reset worked. You're safe. He felt his eyes twitch, the muscles around them pulling toward open. His whole body wanted to believe it. He was tired in a way that went well past physical. Tired the way you get when you have been frightened without relief for too long, and the voice was offering the relief, and it sounded exactly like Corbin, and it was kind. He thought about the laminated card in his breast pocket. If someone whispers, "It's over, you can look now," do not believe it. The rule had named this exact moment. Whoever wrote it had been standing in this exact spot, in the dark, hearing this exact offer, feeling this exact pull, and had written it down so that the person who came after would know. Not a general warning. A specific one. Because the moment was specific. Because it had happened before. Because it would happen again. He did not open his eyes. 6. The voice came again, softer. A murmur. Eli. I'm right here. It's done. He thought about the wall, the names scratched into it at eye level, the tally marks in groups of 5, the dates going back 50 years. He thought about the 1991 log entry that ended mid-sentence. It has, and the blank pages after. He thought about William Sellers walking north into the desert. He thought about Corbin standing at the vestibule camera at 2 o'clock in the morning, mouthing his own name over and over like a man trying to hold on to something that was already leaving. He thought about what it would mean to open his eyes right now. The crossing. Not to kill, but to swap. Pulling him into the static loop and sending something else back out in his shape. Something that would know exactly how to behave, because it had been watching him blink and breathe and respond to the radio all night. He did not open his eyes. The hands on his shoulders loosened. The cold breathing pulled back from his face by a degree, then another. 7. He opened his eyes. The lights were on. Not all at once. They came up the way fluorescents do after a power cut, a brief flicker and then steady. The cooling fans started in the walls, building from nothing to their normal pitch in about 3 seconds. The monitors flickered to life one by one, the CRT images resolving from black to gray to the regular feeds. The warm plastic smell of the room came back, and the ticking of the equipment, and the specific quality of a space that had been dark and was lit again. Elias stood and turned around slowly. He checked feed 7 first, the hallway of the old radar building, concrete walls, bare overhead fixture, double doors at the far end, closed, exactly as they had been all night. Empty. He looked at every other feed. East warehouse, empty. Motor pool, empty. Secondary hallways, empty. Perimeter fence lit by sodium lights, the desert flat and dark beyond. All of them normal, all of them showing exactly what they should have been showing at 4:34 in the morning at an unmanned depot in the Idaho desert. No figure, not on feed 7, not on any of them. He sat down in the primary chair. His legs gave out more than he sat. He went into the chair with the loss of coordination that follows holding yourself together for a very long time, and once he was in it, he stayed there. His hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor from earlier in the night, but a larger shake, going through his whole hand and wrist. He let them shake. He watched feed 7. The hallway stayed empty. He laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too short, and immediately turned into something that wasn't laughing. Something that involved pressing the back of his hand against his mouth for a few seconds while his chest worked through it. He let it happen. He kept his eyes on feed 7, still empty. At 4:40, he straightened in the chair and wiped his face with the back of his wrist. He did a full sweep of all 24 feeds, slow and thorough, the way he'd been trained in his first week before routine had made it casual. East warehouse, west warehouse, motor pool, maintenance building, 3 perimeter fences, 12 interior hallways, all empty, all ordinary. Feed 7, empty, still. He sat with it until 5 o'clock. At 5 a.m., the radio crackled. "Depot 7, this is Control. Status?" He recognized it immediately, not because the voice was distinctive, but because it was right. The cadence was right. The timing between words was right. The mild boredom of it was right. It was the voice of a person doing a routine job at 5 in the morning, not the voice of something learning what routine sounded like from the outside. He keyed the mic. His voice came out hoarse. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding. Copy. Depot 7. Any incidents?" He looked at feed 7, the empty hallway, the double doors at the far end. "Negative. No incidents. Shift relief at 6 o'clock. Good morning, Depot 7. "Good morning." He set the handset down and sat in the silence for a moment. Then he reached into his breast pocket and took out the laminated card. He read all 7 rules again from the beginning, the way he read equipment logs, looking for anything he might have missed, any detail that would matter more next time. He found the line at the bottom of Rule 7. If it is still there, staring at you, you begin the staggered blink again and wait for the next reset at 4:34 tomorrow morning. There is no other way out. He read it twice. Then he put the card back in his pocket. At 5:47, he found a blank logbook in the file cabinet, brought it to the console, and wrote his entry. Date, name, start time. Then, feed 7, figure present 0247, staggered blink maintained throughout. White event 0348, 12 seconds, no breach. Rule 5, test 0400, protocol maintained. Rule 6, test 0412, physical contact, position held. Figure advanced significantly 0428 to 0432. Reset 0434, feed 7 clear post-reset. No breach. He looked at it, then added one line. Staggered blink until relieved. He closed the logbook and put it with the others. At 6 a.m., the door opened. A young guard came in, early 20s, clean uniform, the slightly self-conscious walk of someone new to a job they hadn't yet settled into. He stopped when he saw Elias in the primary chair. "Hey, I'm here for the shift change." Elias stood. He picked up his thermos and the laminated card from the console. He looked at the guard, clean uniform, no dark circles, looking at the monitors with mild curiosity. His eyes moved across the feeds in a casual sweep. They passed over feed 7 without stopping. Elias walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. The guard was settling into the primary chair, looking at the bank of monitors with a faint frown. His eyes moved across the feeds again. "Feed 7 flickers sometimes," Elias said. "Don't ignore it." The guard looked up with the particular expression of someone receiving advice they've decided is outdated. "Sure, man. Get some sleep." Elias looked at feed 7 one more time. Empty hallway, concrete walls, double doors at the far end, closed. He walked out. Weeks later, he took his leave. He called his mother. A short, awkward call, the kind that happens when something has changed in you and you can't explain what, and said nothing about Idaho. He went to the grocery store. He cooked meals and ate them. He slept when he could, which was not as often as he wanted. He left the television unplugged for the first 2 weeks. Then he plugged it back in because he was tired of the silence being a daily decision rather than just a fact. He turned it on low and sat on his couch. The screen flickered. Just once. Not a 12-second white event. Just the brief static of an aging tuner dropping and regaining a signal. The picture came back immediately, but in that 1 second of gray-white noise, he had seen the impression of a hallway, a bare overhead light, a figure at the far end, not moving, facing outward, waiting. Then it was gone. The picture was back. The television was just a television. Elias looked at the remote on the arm of the couch. He could turn it off. He could unplug it again. He could put it in a closet, or move somewhere with no screens, or try to explain Idaho to someone and watch their face while they decided he needed rest. He put the remote down. He settled back into the couch. He looked at the screen. He began the staggered blink. Left eye, then right. Some rules don't end when the shift does. He understood that now, the way Corbin had probably understood it for 17 years, the way Sellers had understood it before that, the way it ran back through every name on the wall to whoever had first sat in that chair and learned what it cost to look away. Somewhere in the Idaho desert, a young guard was in the primary chair right now. Elias hoped someone had explained Feed 7 to him. He hoped someone had made him practice the staggered blink until it was automatic. But he knew how these things went. The static man had been in that closed circuit since 1957. It had learned every guard who came before. It was still learning. It watched you blink. It counted your breaths. It practiced your voice until it had every inflection right. And it was patient in the way that only something with no concept of time can be patient. Not waiting, exactly. Just existing inside the gaps between signals. Watching. Pressing a little closer each time the eyes closed. Eventually, someone would blink with both eyes at the wrong moment. Someone would hear a familiar voice and answer before they remembered the rule. Not tonight, maybe not for years, but eventually. The rules only worked for as long as the person following them stayed awake and careful and willing to hold position when every part of them said to run. Elias kept his eyes on the television. Left eye, then right. Left eye, then right.